Welcome back to the Brewer Fanatic podcast. This is episode number 4 of our minor league kind of deep dive that we're doing on the whole system. I'm Spencer. I'm back with Joseph Czar again. This episode is going to be in regards to the Biloxi Shuckers, so it could be an interesting one. We'll see what we can get out. We'll try and stay positive on this one. I promise. We'll do our best. We will. It's going to be tough, but we're going to do our best. But before we get into anything else, Joseph, how you doing today? How were the holidays? Everything else? How you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm solo farm guy this week. My daughter and my wife are on the Oregon coast, so it's quiet. The farm work never stops, so that continues. The holidays were great. We had a very relaxed, low key, all nuclear family. I have 40 acres of upland forest with just a boatload of conifers. So I always cut down an absurdly large tree that I can barely fit in our 20-foot ceiling farmhouse room. And by this point in time, the tree is almost always falling over. So I'm just delaying taking care of that. But yeah, I'm good. And, I will say, I think that going through this process of formulating thoughts around the Shucker season and going through the Brewers player development Twitter, I feel like the phrase "distance makes your love grow fonder" kind of speaks to how I now feel about this Shucker season. When I was in the season, it felt like a total disaster. I'm just gonna just put it out there. I made no secrets about that in the forums, and it was hard. And we'll get into various components of that. But I will say that going through this process, there are more highlights to their season than I remembered. So it was a good experience. Now, part of that is that Brewers player development is going to pick and choose these moments, and so those might get a little over highlighted. But I was surprised by the number of Shuckers highlight reels that were in there. I was like, whoa! But let's also not get ahead of ourselves with that, because we we both know this was the very consummation of backing into the playoffs. So
Oh yeah.
we'll get into all of that, but I'm actually excited. I didn't think I would be, but I am excited to talk about the Shuckers. So here we are.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like you said, once you kind of dive into it, in the end, they ended up being 3 games under 500. It's not like this was some absolute disaster of a season like it
Right.
it felt like at times. But yeah, I think we can just kind of jump right into that review. We'll start things off with just an overall kind of synopsis of the season. Like I mentioned, they ended up being 3 games under 500. They were 66 and 69. As Joseph mentioned, they did back their way into the playoffs due to some just really the way the Southern League is set up is why they ended up backing their way into the playoffs. And they lost the opening series to Montgomery, who is the Tampa Bay Rays organization, always a very good team, a tough team in that league. They lost that one 2-1. But just to kind of review the entire season here before we dive into it too much, on the coaching front, on the manager front, we had Joe Aralt, who had moved from Wisconsin, from Appleton, up to Biloxi. As we talked about last episode, there were kind of through the organization, everyone is kind of taking a step up, with Mike Guerrero moving into a more of a roving instructor type of role within the organization. He was the former Biloxi manager. So Aralt took that job. He did end up having, over the course of the season, he ended up having some health issues. We aren't completely sure. We weren't really given an exact, diagnosis what was going on, but he ended up having to take a decent amount of time away from the team. The Brewers and the Shuckers kind of tweeted out a tweet just kind of showing their support. They were all wearing shirts with number 33, which is what he was wearing as the manager of the Shuckers. So it was an interesting season, obviously, for that. And obviously, we hope everything is okay with Joe Aralt. I don't know that we've had too many updates since the season ended, but obviously our support and our kind of, we're behind him as well. Hopefully everything is fine with Joe Aralt. But Fidel Pena ended up taking over in his absence, and just in a tough spot, seemed to do a pretty good job of holding everything together and just keeping the team moving in the right direction. And obviously, as we'll talk about in a little bit, some of the the middle parts and end of the season showed some of the brighter spots for the team as well. So I think everyone did a pretty good job of kind of battling through some adversity with the team. And like I said, hopefully everything will end up being okay with Joe Aralt. Hopefully we will have an update at some point and kind of know what's going on with him. But yeah, I mean, Joseph, just kind of talking about that before we get into anything too baseball specific, with what the Shuckers were going through, and obviously what Joe Aralt was going through, kind of what did you notice just from the job that Pena did and how the players and everybody kind of handled business despite probably a little bit of uncertainty and everything else going on around them?
Yeah, it was an interesting period of time there. It was almost as if I suddenly and the collective of our reporters. So it was Daniel, Jim, and I having a little private messaging back and forth, saying, "Hey, I've noticed that Joe Aralt's not in the dugout, and Fidel Pena has taken the role. We haven't heard anything. We'll just have to track that." And also, just shout out to Joe. I know, not only is he missing his time in the dugout, but those deer antlers are very representative of Joe's passion for hunting. And so I'm sure if this is also impacting his ability to get out in the fields or in the forests and do his hunting thing. I mean, I know as an outdoorsman myself, that's a challenge. That's where you
Yeah.
find your joy and your zen. Yeah, it was, it was a scuffling beginning. Joe is very much a player's manager. You can just see that in his interviews and the way he interacts with the players. So I have no doubt that that was impacting in some capacity. I mean, we're all human beings after all. Um, I would say that what I have noticed in the last several years down in Biloxi is that, and this season included, is that I don't necessarily know if it mattered if Mike Guerrero was there, Joe Aralt was there, or Fidel Pena. The teams all kind of had very consistent storylines of potentially underperforming. And I'm not just, if you think back to Sal Frelick or Garrett Mitchell, I would even say Jackson Churio had his kind of most kind of ball as he was adjusting to Double A, and that's a big
Mhm.
jump. And the Southern League's very much a pitcher's league. I question sometimes whether or not the muggy air impacts games down there. I mean, most of these
Oh, yeah.
environments, or not most, but several of them are very coastal or very humid. I have no data to back that up, but it certainly seems to be. And when that 8 and 20 month, that one really sticks out because what we are both kind of joking about. Anybody who was watching the games, they had this technical issues that happened very early in the season. So not only was Joe Aralt going through his own health issues, and who knows how that was coming about. We don't know what the chatter was in the clubhouse or in the organization at large. But they were also dealing with a very kind of neutral home environment where, if I recall correctly, we didn't have video feed at first. Then we didn't have sound, and then suddenly we only had the behind the home plate camera, which if you were tuning in at all, it was literally like watching a game from 100 feet up. It
Yeah.
made it almost impossible. So if you had a team that was going 8 and 20 and you had that camera angle, it wasn't really inviting to tune into the home contests. So that was a tough stretch, and that was also the stretch when Brock Wilken got hit in the face. We all
Mhm.
remember that. That was a big scare. I'm sure not only for Brock as a person and a soon to be dad, but for the clubhouse at large. So they're dealing with Joe Aralt. They're dealing with their prize third base prospect having a very serious injury. And then Mike Bovey got hurt a little bit. It just was, there was a lot of adversity. And you couple that with players that were having their own adversity within their own seasons. It was just a trying time. But that being said, kudos to them for rebounding in the summer, because if you remember that stretch out of the All-Star break, they were 11, 12 games under at that point in time. They got
Mhm.
back to 500 or a few games over for a stretch, and it felt really rosy. We felt like they were playing the baseball they should be playing. That reverted, unfortunately. But yeah, to Joe Arald's thing, man, your heart goes out to him. Your heart goes out to the team. I'm sure it was weighing heavy in some capacity. Um, and it's kudos to them for making it through the season and being professionals about it, and also paying their respects. And Fidel Pena, I think, did as solid job as you can expect, given the circumstances and given the way the team was playing as a whole.
Yeah, 100% agree. And just to go back to the camera thing for a second here, like we had mentioned before we started, but it was already, they're struggling. There's all these struggles. And then it's like, oh, I don't even really want to tune in for a home game and watch these games because it's just like Javik Blake was doing a great job as an announcer telling us as much as he could. But watching it from a bird's eye view of the field, like you can't even tell what pitch is being thrown most of the time. You can't tell really if a hitter's even on time or anything. Like it was really hard to watch them. And it was already a struggling team. So for one part of the season, I think I was pretty just out on watching the Shuckers unless they were on the road. But like you mentioned, after that 8-20 May, they followed it up with a 14-10 June, which brought them back to 33-40 because it had been a struggle up until that point. And then in July, they went 15-8 and ended the month of July at 48-48. They were a 500 team at the end of it, and they were at least 11 games under, if not more, at certain points. But they were 11 games under at the end of May, and yeah, they did a really good job kind of fighting through. As we've mentioned a bunch of times on the other episodes, there's a lot of people coming up and down in AA, and especially like AA, there's more demotions that end up coming down from AAA.
Yeah.
So you have people moving up, you have people moving down, you've got all these moving parts. You have a manager who's not able to be there for parts of it and someone filling in there. Like there's a lot of stuff happening at that time of the year, and they were able to really fight through it. And we talked about it. They backed into the playoffs in the end. They went 12-15 in August, 6-6 in September. It finished 3 games under 500, but they still had to beat out a couple teams to do this while dealing with what I would imagine was a lot more, at least, off the field or things that you had to worry about mentally than a lot of teams were having to deal with during this season. So I think they deserve to be commended. And like you said at the beginning, I think this was one of the things as we review it more in depth, it started to kind of hit me like, okay, it wasn't the most fun season, and it wasn't as fun a season as I was probably envisioning going into it with some of the people that were going to be like Brock Wilken. I was expecting, to have a really fun year watching Brock Wilken and all these things. But like in the end, they did a pretty good job of kind of getting the best out of the team as a whole, even if maybe some of the individuals didn't perform how we expected or everything else that just kind of happened. So to summarize it, as a whole, like it wasn't a great season, but it was honestly, it wasn't that bad.
Yeah.
Just felt like it, especially that start. I always say this with MLB games and just the starts to seasons. Man, a good first 2 weeks in a major league season will buy you so much leeway with the fan base because everybody's tuned in for those first 2 weeks. Everybody's paying attention. Everyone remembers that. A bad 2-week start will make everyone think you suck no matter how well you're doing a month into the season. It just, first impressions always end up mattering in these types of things. And it felt like this season, it just felt like, oh man, this is such a brutal team to watch at first. And in the end, they ended up being just fine. But we'll go through a lot of the players more in depth, and we'll kind of hit on how some of the players probably didn't live up to expectations, which probably lived or is probably creating some of the narrative for us. But yeah, I mean, it was an interesting season overall. We're going to leave out some of the people who kind of moved on as the season progressed. There were some early promotions. A guy like Wes Clark ended up making his way to AAA very quickly. We'll talk about him more when we get to the Nashville one, because that is where he spent the majority of his season. But just early on, he was repeating AA. I think everyone kind of wanted to see what we were going to get out of Wes Clark in a kind of repeat season. And he came out swinging like we always expect. So I guess, what did you see from him early on? And as the season progressed, was it clear that they could have probably used somebody with Wes Clark's type of power in that lineup? Somebody who could just really go deep at any moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is emblematic. And again, this is when I went back and reviewed and looked over my notes, this is the storyline that really came through for me. If you look at how the Shuckers had to create a lineup by August, when they had guys like Connor Scott, who was arguably their best player over the last month until he got injured, who's now a free agent. Wes Clark was called up early. So the
Mhm.
majority of the season, your power bat, your true power bat at first base is gone. Mike Bovee is injured by the end of the year. Clearly your best bat. Just such a professional hitter. You also lost Jacob Mizorowski, Craig Yoho, Shane Smith, and Logan Henderson. They're no
Mhm.
longer in the pitching staff. So what it came about for me was this more sobering perspective. Oh my, right. We lost all the blue chip talent that really would have benefited them in a postseason. And I'm not saying all of it, but some really key players were up in AAA that they just couldn't rely on. So the stables were thin, and you were dealing with arguably what you could consider some replacement level players, like a Casey
Mhm.
Martin, who he had his moments. I don't want to say that, but he's never really hit above 200, but one season in his minor league career. Anyhow, so they were thin, and so yeah, Wes Clark, we were all curious because of last year's power surge he had in the summer, which he just really came on the scene. And then the offseason, Brendan Del Chiaro saying that, he could, we all know what he's capable of. He could be a big league hitter today. I think that all got us excited. And yeah, he came out and he was hitting power again. And it felt like that a promotion was inevitable. And, when he left, what that really did is reminded us how good Ernesto Martinez is.
Mhm.
He shows up time and again in terms of hot hitting, real exit velocities. Just an incredible player. But yeah, you sure would have loved to do a 1-2 combination of the both, one being a DH, one playing first base, or vice versa at any given point in time. So yeah, that's a huge loss to the lineup in terms of a power threat in the cleanup or the 3 or the 5 spot. Um, yeah, they never could replace that because they just didn't have another bat in the lineup capable of going yard like Wes is in any given at bat. And we'll get more. I feel as though we'll get more into a season as a whole in Nashville because he spent the majority of his year there.
Mhm.
But there and again, right off the bat, beginning of the season, more or less in the first 2 months, your marquee power bat's gone. And
Yeah.
what did they in terms of replacing that? You're not going to replace that given the nature of the Brewer system. But who came up eventually was a Dylan O'Reilly, and that's not it's not a position by position swap out, but it's a player stepping in, and that's a distinct loss of RBI capacity. So in a batter challenge league, the loss of the RBI output, the loss of the power bat, the gap power, that makes a big difference. And then from there, you kind of look at, well, who wasn't filling the bill? Well, Brock Wilken really struggled at the end of the year. Eric Brown Jr., as we both know, had a really tough season. We'll talk about that. And then Ethan Murray had a challenge season as well. He was injured. And in that same time that Brendan Del Chiaro was talking about Wes Clark, he also talked about Ethan Murray.
Mhm.
Um, and to me, out of all the seasons in the system, I felt Murray's was arguably for me one of the most frustrating and disappointing. And I think going back and watching some things, I feel as though he may have been forcing himself to play through injury. He just didn't seem to be moving as well. He didn't seem to be in as good a shape. And when he is on, he's a very talented player. So I wonder still today what really happened. But by and large, that was a lost season.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And we'll talk more about Tyler Waisner later on because he ended up back in Biloxi after an early promotion, and he ended
Yeah.
up spending a little bit more time in Biloxi than a guy like Clark did. But just some other departures. I mean, they released Justin King early. We talked about him on another, probably the first podcast when we talked about the people who we lost mid-season. But that was if you look at the numbers, it wasn't a huge loss for the bullpen at the time, but it was a talented loss for the team at that time, and somebody with a lot of good stuff. And then later in the season, obviously TJ Shook was traded as well, which I know you are a big fan of TJ Shook as well.
Yep.
So it wasn't like you saw a ton of talent from the opening day roster move around, but you did see some other people who we'll get to who um, later in the season got promoted, like Mizorowski, somebody who didn't start there, and Logan Henderson, but ended up making his way through there on his way. Same with Craig Yoho. So, like I mentioned earlier, they did have people moving their way through the roster quite a bit, and that makes it difficult to kind of find consistency when a lot of those guys were there. That was during their best stretch of the season. And then a lot of them ended up making it to Nashville, and then they started to struggle a little bit more. And that's not a big surprise. They had to bring in some Dylan O'Ray type replacements, like you said, and Eric Brown Jr. definitely did not have the season you wanted. Brock Wilken didn't either. So there was a lot going on, but we'll jump into the tiers here in a second. Is there anything else from the season that just stands out as like a notable time? Anything that I didn't even mention? Bradley Blaylock got traded, who was a
Yeah,
pretty big part
right.
of
There's
their.
another arm right there. Yeah.
Yeah, he was doing well. The strikeout numbers weren't popping off the page or anything like that, but he was limiting walks, and his ERA was in a very good spot when he got traded
Yep.
by the Brewers to the Rockies. So that was another arm he was performing pretty well, and then they don't have him anymore. So just yeah, there were a lot of people who kind of shuffled their way through. Like I said, Double A we talked about on the last episode, I think is the biggest jump currently in minor league baseball. That high A to Double A jump is a pretty tough one to make. And the Brewers pitchers, I would say, handled it pretty well. Those who did make that jump, I think the hitters saw a little bit more of a struggle when they tried to make that jump. So we'll get into that as we talk about some of these position players. But I think this is where we're going to notice some of the, I don't want to say disappointment, but I'll say these lists are a lot shorter than the ones we've had on the last couple of episodes. There just aren't as many players of note. And that's part of the reason probably that there were some struggles on the team side, and some of the players who did actually perform pretty well, like a Lamar Sparks, a Connor Scott, like you mentioned, they're both no longer within the organization. So we're not including them on this list, but they both did some pretty good things. We've talked about Sparks earlier. I think best arm I've seen from any minor league outfielder in the Brewers system at any point, just an absolute cannon. And he had a really, really good finish to the season offensively
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
He really hit for the last couple of months. He started really slow, but he really got it going with the bat. And yeah, Scott came in from being a minor league free agent pickup in the middle of the season, and
Yeah.
all of a sudden showing power, showing a lot more than he had shown at any point with the Marlins organization. And yeah, it was those two were a big part of the turnaround as well. But like I said, they're not going to be included in this list. We're not going to talk about them specifically because they are no longer with the Brewers organization. But I think from my perspective, and you can chime in here too, but I'd be happy with either of them being back in the organization if it works out. I think they're both players that have some untapped potential in them, even though they're a little older, obviously, for the prospect side of things. And both showed some really good things on both sides of the ball. I think they both have. Sparks, I think, regressed a little bit defensively in the outfield last year, but like I said, he's got the arm and he's shown really well in the outfield before. And I thought Scott looked pretty solid defensively after coming over as well. And obviously, like I said, the bat took a pretty big jump. So, two guys that you'd be interested in coming back if there's interest on both sides.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your earlier question, you were saying if there were any other things that stuck out. I think that goes right to the outfield. The outfield sticks out in terms of, if you look at the roster today, the only listed outfielder is Adam Hall. Now, we know that Casey Martin spent some time there, not a natural left fielder, but he went out there, even maybe filled in. I know Adam Hall filled in some center field, but we also know that Dylan O'Ray goes to center field. But if you look at the roster today, they have zero power in the outfield, none. They only have one listed outfielder. And so that gets into an issue we have been, and I say issue with quotes, but a depth area or a conundrum, if you will, for the Brewers is they do not have ready outfield depth. They don't. What you see up at the major league level, that's pretty much it, right?
Yeah.
And that's why when you and I talk about a player like Tyler Black, I still continue to say, and I will, his best position is the outfield. It just is. And I know we're trying to work him into the infield, but that's where that becomes the thing for me, where I say meaningful depth. We haven't seen a lot from a Brewer Hicklin. We know Isaac Collins can play out there, not his natural position per se. Tyler Black looks really good in the outfield. I'm just going to say that now. But yeah, we don't have outfield depth in the Shuckers right now. So what that means is Alara is likely going to start there. He just probably is. which
Yeah.
means Dylan O'Reilly will probably be given the everyday second base duties, things of that nature. But yeah, I would welcome both. This is a long-winded way of getting to your question now. Yes, I would absolutely welcome a Lamar Sparks back. He did have several very strange errors this year in the outfield that were very uncharacteristic. Um, a late season issue that we both saw of, and I sent the clip as it happened. There were some snafus in the outfield grass that just left you scratching your head, like, how did that even happen? Some of them were just, lack of focus drops. We've seen good defense, and we know he has the arm. That is not debatable. Connor Scott, former first round pick for the Pirates, I believe back in 2018,
Yep.
if I'm
Yeah.
remembering. Yeah, mid-season he had struggled in
Oh yeah.
season for for the last season and a half. He did not struggle as a shucker at all. He looked good, and I'm
Hmm.
sure he wanted to capitalize on that and try to find the situation that he wanted for himself. I would love to see both guys back, just
Yeah.
for the fact of having capable professional guys to step in and start games. I don't know, if you don't have players of that caliber, they're going to be really hamstrung for depth.
Oh yeah.
They just
Yeah.
are. So I mean, it'll be more than likely it'll be like last season when we saw late signings. In 2025 to fill out the roster as more minor league free agents are looking for opportunities. But yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see how that shakes out.
Yeah.
It's just because as of today, we really just have no idea.
No. And that brings us to a question we did get from Do Wizard, who gave us quite a few questions. So thank you for that, because as we mentioned in the forums, that will help us get through this one a little bit easier. So we really appreciate all the questions you gave us. But one of them was, can Lara, who you brought up, make it to Double A and perform well? And then what do you think the rest of the outfield will look like? So I agree with what you said. You already kind of answered part of this. I do think he probably is in Double A, at least as the rosters currently stand. You never know what they're going to add over the course of the rest of the offseason. I think personally, I think the Brewers might prefer to keep him in high A to start next year and hope that he kind of pushes his way to Double A early. But as you just laid out, they kind of need him to go to Double A next year to start the year with how the roster is currently constructed. I mean, there is a big time lack of outfield. They used one of their minor league Rule 5 draft picks on an outfielder. I'm imagining he will end up there. But beyond that, there is literally not a Double A outfielder left. I mean, you can say some of the people who Dylan O'Reilly spent time in the outfield last year. I'm sure he would spend time out there again. And I would honestly say that's more where I think he ends up being long term anyway. So I think that makes sense if he is out there. But I think right now Lara ends up there. Does he perform well? I don't know that he does right away. I think he can hold his own, personally, and we'll talk about Dylan O'Reilly in a second, but I think he's more likely to hold his own than what O'Reilly was when he first came up. Um, just a little bit more advanced, I think, a little bit more bat speed there that'll help him out, but he wasn't great in high A this year, so it would be a challenge for sure. But I do think right now that's what it looks like. I think it's Lara, O'Reilly. I'm blanking on the Rule 5 pick's name. I can't think of it right now, but I would imagine those are the three outfielders as they look at the roster currently within the organization. And I think the last name's Spain, if I remember right, Garrett Spain or something along those lines. But
Yes.
he will almost certainly be there. I could see a guy, well, no, even a lot of the AAA guys who were out there are also minor league free agents. So yeah, it's just the upper level depth that in the outfield spots is lacking right now. And I would imagine that that's going to force Lara into another challenge at Double A. But we'll see. I think he's at least capable of holding his own. I don't know that I'd expect him to do great, but I think he can hold his own there. Any differing thoughts for you?
Well, just to clarify for listeners, Spencer's referring to the minor league Rule 5 and the Spain pickup, obviously. But just to clarify, yeah, I think with Lara, we talked about it when we talked about the high A and the AFL season. The coaches love him, and the reviews of his play are always fairly positive and glowing. And
Hmm.
he had a better AFL output and consistent contact than he did in high A. he certainly didn't force his way to Double A. But again, if we're looking at the roster as is today, I don't know how they cannot have him up
Yeah.
there. They just don't have the depth at all. They don't have the bodies. So from a strictly war of attrition vantage point, they may just have to throw him to the wolves, so to speak. But I agree with you in terms of he's stronger than Dylan O'Reilly. He has a faster bat, better defender. I mean, there aren't many players
Mhm.
that are better defenders than Luis Lara, as we know.
No.
So yeah, would he thrive? Boy, that's a 50-50 proposition. I'd lean 40-60. He won't, just to the fact
Yeah.
that it's a big adjustment. It just is. And um, he's not a power bat as it is. So he's going to have to adjust to the way the ball travels there. He's going to have older players, better pitchers, the whole 9 yards. Can he do it? Yes. He has the talent, but he certainly didn't do it in high A. It's not like he had a bad season by any stretch, but he certainly didn't take the next step that we were all hoping for. So I think it's a lofty proposition, but by just bare necessity, they may just have to do it. Um, yeah, it's an area, it's a true area within the organization at large. What are they going to
Mhm.
do? Double A and honestly Triple A, though they've gotten some guys since. Restituyo comes to mind off the top of my head. But yeah,
Yep.
we'll just have to see how it shakes out. I would lean he'll get the opportunity, if not to start the season within the first 2-3 months.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we shall
Agreed.
see.
I could see the Mike Bovee path from last year
Yeah,
pretty
within the
easily
first
for
couple
him. Just
weeks.
a hot start in high A and immediately get pushed there. So yeah, that's a good question. I think that's one the Brewers are going to be answering this offseason and trying to figure out themselves. So we will see how it shakes out, but we can move into our tiers here. Like I mentioned, only really 10 position players we're going to talk about, which I know it sounds like a lot, but it's a lot less than we've been talking about. And for this one, we did not really have a star potential tier like we have on the other ones because we don't necessarily have a Cooper Pratt. I can mention Cooper Pratt did end up making it to Double A. He played in 2 playoff games, and he hit a home run in one of them. But he is not. We're not including him in this. He didn't really spend enough time in Biloxi for us to include him in this. But if he was, he would probably be the one kind of leading the way in the top tier for this group. But we're going to stick with kind of the MLB caliber tools with some questions. And I think the questions are going to be a big part of what we talk about here because there are some pretty big questions for pretty much all of these guys. But there are also some pretty big, interesting qualities that they have, and some tools that are pretty big that you obviously can dream on and hope that they can put it together. Starting with who we already mentioned, Brock Wilken. As you mentioned, he did have an injury earlier this season with the getting hit in the face with a pitch. He ended up missing only about a month, which was pretty quick turnaround. And while the end of season numbers might lead you to believe that the return was a big time struggle, he actually performed pretty well immediately following his return. In his like immediate return, he was playing pretty well. He was hitting, it was probably the best stretch of his season. And then he had a really, really tough finish to the season. And we talked about it when we went through some of the AFL stuff in the first episode, but he was not dealing with, he also had a kid during that time, which is obviously a great thing, but also a lot of stress. And there's a lot more that gets added to your plate in that time as a player who's already going through some struggles, who's already been hit in the face. Just a lot of stuff that kind of happened to Brock Wilken this year. But in the end, despite all of that, due to mainly having a pretty good walk rate and also hitting 17 homers, which was up there in minor league baseball overall. He actually finished with a 106 WRC plus. Um,
Yeah,
I thought
which was
even
wild to me
beyond,
when I saw that originally. I was like, wow, okay.
yeah. Well, we should also note before we even talk about all these guys, we should probably note the Southern League hitting environment was absurdly pitcher friendly this year. Um, there were not very many great hitters in the Southern League. And just being decent basically made you an above average hitter for this league just because that's how it went. Um, the pitching was very good. There were some rumors of potential dead ball stuff going on with the Southern League at times, but which we, of course, will factor in when we talk about the pitchers as well. But Wilkin ended up doing fine despite everything else on the whole. I think it was more, we saw some swing and miss more than you would want to. I think he obviously had what I call a little bit of Corey Hart syndrome, where the sliders low and away were a tough battle for him throughout the season. But he also showed off some big time power. And I thought defensively, we saw a pretty decent version of him at third base. I still think first base is probably where you would prefer he end up long term, just based on his current ability. But if he can handle third base, that helps him a lot. And I think it makes it a lot easier for him to be on a roster in general. Just being able to kind of go back and forth is super valuable. So yeah, I thought he took a step defensively. Honestly, he's been better defensively since he was drafted than I expected him to be. And we saw the power. We saw some of the good stuff, but there were a lot of struggles, especially with the swing and miss and really some of the swing decisions in general. I know the walk rate was pretty high, but he just didn't swing much. So that also made, we talked about it with Luke Adams. He's not quite in the Luke Adams category of don't swing at all. But he was, I believe, the closest guy that they listed for the Brewers to Luke Adams in that same kind of quadrant. He wasn't, nobody in minor league baseball was by Luke Adams in that, on that graphic from Baseball America, but Wilkin was in the vicinity. And when you have a pretty big whiff rate, a 30% whiff rate, and you're not swinging that much, that does concern me. Like with Adams, you don't have that whiff rate. He's not swinging that much, but when he does, he's usually making contact. The combo of very limited swings and then not making contact super often when you swing, that does concern me. But what were your thoughts on Wilkin this year? What did you see from him? And I guess how much hope do you have for him moving forward? Because we did actually get a question for that, like from Do Wizard. What's next for him? Do you see him improving? What will happen to his defensive position? Can he stick at third? I kind of touched on some of the defensive stuff, but feel free to disagree if you have anything there. But what do you think with Wilkin? What do you think is next for him?
Yeah, it's a fascinating topic, frankly, and on many levels. If you extrapolate out the Luke Adams kind of diaspora, if you will, with Brock Wilkin, Brock Wilkin had the same concerns at high A, right? He wasn't swinging a bunch, but he was making more contact and he was having better success. Well, he's in high A versus double A. So to me, that's a kind of a reverse image of what is going to happen for Luke Adams when he goes to double A. Is he going to face the same issues where he's not swimming as much, but his whiff rate goes up? I don't know. I don't think so, but he's an uncanny swing, big leg lift, selective to a fault. So that's an interesting thought exercise, and we'll have to wait and see. The thing with Wilkin is that what's next for him, well, my hope for him in terms of what's next is that he evolves into not necessarily being a two true outcome player. Like if you, well, I guess three: swing and a whiff, or strikeout, or a long ball. That's essentially what he turned into this past season. I give him an asterisk for the injury. You never know how that psychosomatic impact is going to trickle into a season. None of us do. And also, I point to another of his teammates who had a child in his early seasons in Russ Smith. Russ Smith had a very hard first season in Wisconsin. Well, he was having a kid. He just had his best season. And now he's a year into being a dad. So there's an unknown toll on a player's psyche and their approach, et cetera, their whole life. There's a lot going on. So I take that into consideration here. Now, when I remove that context and just look at the raw results, I think the 106 WRC plus is one of those things where I look at, well, yeah, that kind of makes sense because Wilkin pops in terms of he has stretches, but he never quite gets over the hump, right? And so every hot stretch he had this season, I thought he was turning the corner again to being a legitimate like threat, major league, hot corner first, but then he regressed and like he just had a really rough end of the season. So what's next for him? I would just like to see him be consistent in something, right? And not just the power
Yeah.
ball strikeout kind of thing. So that's what I would like to see. I have been, to your point about the defense, I have been pleasantly surprised by his defense since
Mhm.
his first days with the Timber Rattlers. So I don't really have as many concerns that you're not going to have as much range, obviously, but he has pretty good hands. He's got more than an adequate arm.
Oh, yeah.
He's accurate with it. He rarely is misfiring. He doesn't have those Luke Adams issues at all. So that's a plus. That's a pleasant surprise. And so you can kind of like pencil him in. I have no doubts he could handle first base. He's pretty fluid. So maybe some mild adjustments. So I feel pretty good there. To me, all the concerns I have about Brock Wilkins' game are with the bat. Pretty much
Yeah.
everyone. And that's a big question mark for me.
Yeah.
So
Which is
I just
hilarious
right.
because that
It
was
is.
supposed to be the opposite.
I
At the
know.
time of the draft,
Yeah.
that was supposed to be
But
the
you never know how these things are gonna shake out. You
no,
just don't. Each player's
no.
different, and this proof is in the pudding right here.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I think I agree with everything you said. I think we've gotta see what he can do with the bat because even though the defense holds up, it was always a matter of can the defense hold up because the bat's going to be very good. The defense isn't good enough on its own to be like, okay, the bat can be decent and the defense will help it,
Right,
stick in the big leagues. He
right.
has to have the bat for all of this to work. So that's what we're going to find out this next year. I think this is going to be a really big year for him. I'm sure he's kind of starting to slip on a lot of the national lists, and it'll be one of those seasons where probably a lot of eyes will be on him, and we'll see if he can bounce back. And I still kind of think he will, but we're going to find out. So
Yeah,
next,
I would actually say what has surprised me in the entire experience this past year is that he hasn't slipped really by my vantage point. He's still top 10 in a lot of areas.
he
And
is, yeah,
I've questioned that. And it seems to me that this year is going to be the year where if he struggles again, he's not going to get the benefit of the doubt. And I
yeah,
just hope for his sake and his family's sake, I hope it does. I hope this was an anomaly, and it's certainly possible.
yeah, yeah. One guy who did not struggle much with the bat this year was Mike Bovee. As we kind of mentioned earlier, he began the year in high A, back where he had finished last season after being drafted in 2023. Him and Wilkin both pretty much went from the ACL to high A. Wilkin had a little bit more success. Bovee slowed down at the end of the year a little bit, so they sent him back there, and he got off to an incredibly hot start. Immediately was pushed to Double A, where the numbers to some people probably don't look as exciting. But again, keeping in mind the Southern League um, hitting environment, once he got there, he was quite good. Even in just that environment, he was one of the better hitters in all of, not Double A, but all of the Southern League. And on the whole, for the whole season, he ended up with a 161 WRC plus. He had 6 homers, which was good to see. Some of the pop, especially he had a 3-homer in 3 day, or not 3 days, but 3 games stretch where he was showing off some of the power. He was a guy, just going back to that draft, he was actually somebody that I had kind of pegged as a potential Brewers pick. I thought he was somebody that they would like and that would make a lot of sense for them. And I thought there was more power in there. He had showed exit velocities over 110 in college, and he went to the ACL and immediately showed he had a 112-mile-per-hour homer in the ACL after getting there. So he's got the pop. There's exit velocity in there. There's legitimate juice, but he hits a lot of line drives, which is a good thing. At the same time, all it takes is a slight adjustment to get it in the air, and all of a sudden you could see, I think, legitimate 20-plus homer power here. I think he's got that type of power within him. It'll be interesting to see how they can try and find that balance. You obviously don't want to lose his ability to hit line drives. That's extremely valuable. He's a big time doubles guy. He actually had triples in a few games in a row once he got to Double A, which he's not the fastest guy, we should point out. And that's gonna be something that we'll talk about in a second with his defensive home. But there's a lot to like here. I'm a big fan of him just as a pure hitter. I think he's one of the better pure hitters in the entire organization, and doesn't strike out, draws walks, doesn't whiff, has pop in the bat. He hasn't necessarily gotten to it, like I said, all the time, but I think it's coming. It's a matter of what we're going to do defensively for me, and I think he can handle third base defensively if you need him to. The arm is not Brock Wilkins level. I think defensively, I don't view him too differently than Wilkin, but I think Wilkin has a much better arm, which makes a pretty big difference. He looked pretty good at first base. The issue is I think you need the power to come along if first base is going to be the long-term home. So we'll see how that goes. But what did you see from Bovey this year? What are your thoughts on him? And do you think first base is the likely home for him defensively?
I gotta say, having watched Bovey now in 2 consecutive seasons, what a treasure, man! Just such a professional hitter. And when you see the amount of players you do and the number of games I watch, and Mike Bovey is the same hitter every day,
Mm-hmm.
and it just doesn't change. He's disciplined. He goes to all fields. He hits line drive. He has power in that bat. He is a major league hitter today. There's zero questions in my mind. Best hitter in the system, arguably one of the best hitters in all the minor leagues. I don't even hesitate to say that. He's just that good. So from that respect, just what a true blessing as a Brewers fan to watch him every day in the minor leagues, just knowing, okay, this guy's a pro. There's no doubt about it. When you see a guy like this, you just know it's different. And this is where WRC Plus absolutely speaks to it. Didn't drop anything when he moved up to Double A. Was just like hitting in the same ballpark. That does not happen. It just doesn't. So you just know that that's a unique facet of his game. Yeah, defensively, yeah, he's doesn't have a great arm, can handle the third. I wouldn't say it's Ben Metzinger bad from third base. He's now moved
Yeah.
on. Good luck in your endeavors, Ben. Um, but yeah, it doesn't have Wilkins' arm. He's more than capable of handling it. My real concern with Mike Bovey, first and foremost, is can he stay healthy? That's my
Mm-hmm.
big thing. I don't know. These nagging injuries he's had 2 consecutive years in the system, they're concerning. He's missing significant chunks of experiential time to develop further and get up to the major league level. And if he's having him in the minor league games, that concerns me in terms of like when he gets up to the majors and starts hitting, can he handle the grind? And then for
Yeah.
me, it becomes, is he better served as a DH? And
Yeah.
he's that good a hitter to merit that consideration. But yeah, he could handle first base. But for me, when you drafted a Blake Burke and you already have Ernesto Martinez, who to me is the best first baseman in the system by a considerable amount, um, all respect to Wes Clark. Um, he just kind of gets like you're back into this Tyler Black conundrum, right? But he's a better hitter than Tyler, he's a very good hitter in his own right. So you just wonder, is it going to be another hard nut to crack as he gets up to that level in terms of are they going to find a place to play him? I think this is a case where the bat is good enough where you make it happen. So
Yeah.
whether it's first, whether it's second, whether it's third, whether this is the actual Ben Zobrist guy in the
Yeah.
infield at least, whereas Tyler Black kind of faded from that in my vantage point. Haven't seen him enough. Um, his bat is absolutely that good. So I have a feeling they're just going to move him around,
Yeah.
including so if you include DH there, you have 4 positions. He's a guy you can, in a way, you can make room for him almost every day.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I think the concern obviously becomes how many of those guys do the Brewers end up having. So
Of
it's going
course.
to be a fight for some of those guys. I do think I've talked about it a lot. I don't think Black is going to be a Brewer major leaguer. Really, I just don't. I think he's going to end up doing it with someone else. I think Bovey has a chance to fall into that same category, but I also think he does have a chance to be that guy that you just talked about. I think he could end up holding his own. I saw him play second base in person in Appleton last year, and some of the footwork was a little clunky, but it wasn't like for me,
Yeah.
Tyler Black's hands were so bad that I don't think hands get fixed very often. I think you can fix footwork more than anything else. That's
Yeah.
something that takes more reps, but I think people normally have just naturally pretty good hands. And I thought Bovey had pretty good hands. I don't think that's a big problem for him. We
Yeah.
saw it when he went to first base. He hadn't played that much, and he took to it pretty quickly. Unlike what we've seen with Black, where it looked uncomfortable. Was he perfect? No, but I thought he took to it pretty well, and he had the hands. You could see it on the picks and some of that stuff over there. So I think he could handle second base. Obviously, the Brewers have played guys like Travis Shaw at second base. I think he could kind of play that type of a a second base. So, and Shaw, honestly, he graded out pretty well defensively. So more power to him, but it's
Yeah.
that type of body at least that would be over there. Not somebody with a ton of range, but maybe a good first step and just makes the plays that he needs to make. So I'm a big fan of Bovey. I really like the bat. It's going to be interesting to see how they make it work with the defensive spot, and then also if he can start to tap into more of that power, because I think that changes things a lot for him. If the power is there while maintaining most of the other stuff, then he's a really, really good hitter, and you just have to find a way to put him in the lineup. But without the power, then it's more of a matter of, well, is he a contact guy without speed? Because those can be valuable, but they have to be really, really, really good offensively to have value if you're going to not bring the stolen base part of it to the table too. So he's going to be one to watch.
Yeah, and what's fascinating about this whole conversation to me is that what starts coming up and bubbling up in my own thoughts universe is that this really speaks to the nature of how valuable it is to have redundancy in types of prospects, because as you speak to in terms of a Tyler Black, what comes up for me with Mike Bovey is a guy like Adam Shevsky, who we've already talked to with Lowe. So when you have this redundancy, what it does is it creates maneuverability within the organization. You can use guys in packages. I agree with you. Much to my chagrin, honestly, having been a lifer in the Tyler Black fan club, so to speak, from day one as a Brewer, when I've seen him enough and knowing, wow, his best spot is in the outfield, and knowing how stacked they are with quality outfielders, it becomes a redundancy thing where, well, you can leverage that for a major league ready need. So a guy like Mike Bovey might end up in that camp too. I don't know, but this is a good problem to have because it gives you multiple avenues to explore. So they may end up trading them. They may end up getting players back. They may end up making it to the big league club and taking a permanent role. We'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, even to that point, it's part of it is that you get more shots at somebody hitting.
Exactly.
Like you have all these guys, they might look the same, but as much as we love all of this minor league prospecting, all of this stuff, the hit rate is not that high on minor league prospects working out. And we don't want to make it sound like, all these guys are going to be great. We're mostly talking about, what can become of them. But when you have 3 or 4 guys with similar profiles in the system, that's not a bad thing, because odds are at most one of them is going to work out.
Right.
And if more than one works out, then you probably do have a really nice trade piece, or you find a way to make it work at the big league level.
Right. So, and then that gets into the nature of, we know that the Brewers have one of the smaller budgets in the lower third in the entire league, not the lowest. Let's remind people of that. But this is very important for them. So when you hear prospect gurus, et cetera, talking and things like, oh, that's a Brewers hitter to a T in terms of they make contact, they're disciplined, things like that, there's a reason. And they acquire these types of players because they have a skill set that other teams might covet, and they covet. So it gives them a lot of flexibility. And they are one of the best teams at doing this. And so when we miss on trades or when we miss on players and we give away prospects, it goes back to your point on most of them don't hit. So when we see a guy like Lucas Urseg given away to Oakland for cash and he becomes a closer in the playoffs, well, you also look at it from the vantage point of the player, got the opportunity. He was sent back to his home club, given a big league chance, and he ran with it. And so that's a win-win for both clubs. So
yes. I would imagine, even just on that note, I think the Brewers gave him that opportunity out of
absolutely
the kindness of their heart more than anything else. I think they knew it was going to be hard for him to make it up into our bullpen, and said, hey, we can send you home. Lucas Urseg had been through a lot as a Brewers minor league player, and he battled through all of it. He changed his position from position player to pitcher, and the Brewers gave him an opportunity. And the only reason I'm even talking about that is because that type of stuff doesn't go unnoticed when other players are looking at your organization. Yes, in terms of value, you probably feel like, oh man, the Brewers probably could have got something for him if he'd come up to the big leagues and showed this. But at the same time, it's probably helped them sign a couple minor league free agents. It might have helped them sign a guy like Tobias Myers a couple years ago. Like, man, this organization really treats people well. That type of stuff does matter over the long haul. And the Brewers are really good about doing that stuff. And I think obviously there's a level of, we know this helps us a little bit, but at the same time, I think the Brewers as an organization genuinely do try to do things the right way for the most part. And that type of stuff might lead you to lose somebody who you would like to have right now, but it was done for the right reasons, and usually that comes back around in the form of a Tobias Myers or a Colin Ray who signs a minor league deal. Like,
Yeah,
it's the right way to do stuff.
and with both Tobias and with Lucas in this case, they both really started making their names for themselves as Shuckers. That's
Yes,
where they really,
they did.
Tobias Myers' opening game in 2023, 11 strikeouts,
Yeah.
just blasted onto the scene and led the entire system in strikeouts that year. And then his bullpen work when he got called up to the Sounds is why I was saying before he
Mhm.
was even pitching with the Brewers, and I thought it was going to be a bullpen role, frankly, but I just said, hey, this is the guy we got to watch.
Yeah.
Fastball has the shape, has the run. Here we are.
Yeah. Absolutely. So we have taken a long time to go through these first two. We'll get through the next few a little quicker, and then the others of note we don't have as much on. But
Maybe we will.
I'm speaking it into existence. Ernesto Martinez Jr. I think this is one that we've both been pretty high on, big fans of for a while. Just one, it's along the lines of the Luke Adams stuff that I talked about last time, where he is a blast to watch in general. This is a 6'6", 250-pound dude who has played center field, and he played some center field this year for a few games, but also plays first base. And this guy will do the splits on everything. And
Yeah.
it's incredible to watch. But I should note, like, he's not doing it in a way that would ever harm him. He's very good at going directly to the ball, and just he buys outs by doing this type of stuff and having the flexibility and stuff that he does. It's very fun to watch. Offensively, the guy takes one of the biggest swings you will ever see, but at the same time, his whiff rate and his strikeout rate are in great spots. So it's not a swing that's putting him in this position where he just can't make contact, but it is a swing that gave him a 109.5 90th percentile exit velocity, which is otherworldly. Like, it's
Yeah.
unheard of. That's almost the only people comparable in the minors were basically like the junior Camaneros of the world. And Ernesto was 25 for the most part doing this in double A. So it's not the same as a 20-year-old prospect doing it at the upper levels, but it's a guy who battled through a lot of injuries earlier in his career. He also dealt with kind of COVID kind of stunted his growth. Like, he was coming off of one of his better seasons. And then, of course, he had a shutdown for a year. Then he got hurt coming off of it. We saw a ton of really good things this year. He has huge, huge power. He hasn't, I think the one knock I would have on him just in terms of production is that we'd really like to see him get it in the air more often. Because if he does, there's humongous power in there. And he had a pretty high ground ball rate. He didn't hit as many fly balls as you would like for somebody with this type of power, but I don't know, man. I don't know. It depends who I would call a first baseman, if I would call him the best first base prospect in the system. But I do think that's a legitimate, like, he's somebody who could help the Brewers this year, and it would not surprise me at all. That's how I would phrase it. I think he could be, especially with no Jake Bauers, especially with the current situation where they haven't really signed anybody to fill that role. And we talked about with Black, I don't think Black can play first base. I know Ernesto can play first base. I think there's a pretty decent chance we see him in the big leagues at some point this year, and I would not be surprised if he performed well enough to kind of hold that roster spot and potentially become more of an everyday guy once Rhys Hoskins has moved on. So um, it feels like overdoing it, maybe too much praise for a guy who's 25 in double A. But I think with everything else that he's gone through, I think his development was stunted a little bit, and that he is still growing as a player despite being a little bit more advanced in his age. And just to wrap it up before I let you talk about him here, he did re-sign with the Brewers on a minor league deal this offseason, the second offseason in a row that he's done it. So obviously there's a good relationship with the organization here. Slightly surprised he didn't go the Carlos Rodriguez route that we'll talk about in a second. I thought there was somebody that might offer him a 40-man spot to bring him in just with the raw tools that he has. But he also went undrafted in the Rule 5, so that kind of says a little bit about where he's viewed around the league. But for me, just watching him as much as I was able to this year, and even just going back a few years to when he was in Carolina, and just he was doing crazy stuff. Tons of stolen bases for his size. Like, he's just very fun to watch. What are your thoughts on Ernesto? And do you think he could be part of the Brewers' plans this year?
Absolutely, 100%. I would just, when he was in the lower levels, he was undisciplined. He had a really kind of sloppy. Um, his head would leave the zone during his
Hmm.
swing because he was over swinging. And the last 2 years has given us a look into this is he's now created a baseline of like, okay, we can now expect this, and then it becomes we can start dreaming even bigger. So that's what I he's one of my favorite players in the entire system. So getting him re-upped, people have to remember this was a young man who was an international free agent out of Cuba, and he's now been with the organization. I think he was signed as a 16-year-old, so he's in
Hmm.
his 8th year with the Brewers. So there is a commitment here. There is a development path here. They've been through all of it, and once he signed that minor league free agent pack, it was pretty much certain that he wasn't going to get picked up in Rule 5 because why would you? You can no longer send him down, right? His options are gone. So that to me was a huge boon. When they signed him, I was just thrilled, and I very easily could see him as part of the first base picture by midseason. Like he's just if he has another season, and this is a player now who's been doing it for almost 2 full years
Yeah.
and didn't drop a beat when he got promoted to Double A. That means a lot. When a
Hmm.
guy gets promoted to Double A, you typically see the regression. With Martinez, like Bovey, you haven't seen a drop of anything. If anything, Martinez has gotten better since he got to Double A, which is stunning. He's hitting the ball harder. He's starting to loft the ball. This is a guy, I don't care about the later development here. To me, he's just starting to get comfortable with his body and having that.
Yeah.
He's an extremely athletic ballerina of an athlete, absurdly athletic for his size. Those full splits, he'll do them like 3 or 4 times in one game.
Oh
And
yeah.
it's like one of those where whoop, whoop, it just pops right back up, doesn't miss a beat. And this gets into the whole thing of like, if we're going to talk about Tyler Black at first base, please, when you have a guy that is 6'6", that can scoop up anything, that can stretch, he saves at least 3 outs a game in Double A with his range. It changes the whole scope of the infield, and you have a lot of guys who may not have accurate arms to first base. He makes it kind of a non sequitur. It doesn't even matter. So I personally, I could go on and on about Ernesto. I've watched him since he's been in the system, and to see his evolution, this is a guy that I just have a lot as a fan invested in. I want to see him be a Brewer.
Yeah.
I really do, because I want to see him continue. And it's not just his game. He's just a really fun person. If you've
Yes.
ever seen his interviews, he's super eclectic, he's worldly, he's cultured, he's smart, he's very well spoken. He's just a joy to like listen to talk about his life. So this is just a guy that I root for, like really
Hmm.
root for. And so I really hope that this 1 year prove it deal again becomes a major league deal. That's my hope for him.
Yeah. Agreed. 100%. On the other side of the size spectrum, we have Dylan O'Ray, who is I saw a couple times out there. He was at second base while Martinez was at first, and there's a big difference. Listed at 5'9", 160 compared to 6'6", 250. Big difference here. And in the power and everything else, it shows pretty clearly. Now, we talked about O'Ray last time. We mentioned we would get into a little bit more of the negatives on this one, as we saw a pretty good version of Dylan O'Ray when he was in high A. But there were some pretty big struggles after making his way to Double A. He was in a very good spot overall, numbers wise, when he made his way there and ended up having a weighted runs created plus under 100. So below average. And it was a big time struggle for him to make this jump. Now, even at the time, I think most of us thought it was pretty aggressive to make the move with him in this spot. And I hinted at it earlier when we talked about Lara, but for me, I just don't know that he has the processing or the bat speed to kind of keep up with what he was seeing in Double A. In high A, he had even struggled with some velocity. He had struggled with the good spin, and he's actually another one who falls into the does he actually have a great eye or does he just not swing very much? He kind of falls into that same category where he doesn't whiff. It's not like Wilkin, but it's more like Adams, where there's a matter of, okay, but is he just taking everything? And when he got to Double A, pitchers are throwing the ball over the plate a lot more, and now all of a sudden that's a struggle for him too. And at his size, it's a little different because it's a little harder to throw him strikes than a big dude like Wilkin. But still, is there a matter of actual good swing decisions, or just kind of, for lack of a better term, just kind of guessing and not really taking the bat off your shoulder until you absolutely have to? I think that would be my concern. But he stole 62 bases this year. There's big time speed. He's shown an ability to play some infield, to play some outfield. He's got like quick hands, but again, I don't know that the bat speed is necessarily there yet. I think he probably needs to add a little bit more just bulk as he gets a little bit older here. But what have you seen from O'Ray? And what do you think we'll see in kind of a repeat here of Double A? You think we'll see a little bit more success the second time around?
I mean, it depends on his offseason.
Yeah.
He's got to get stronger.
Yes.
You know, and the thing is, what's fascinating is about player by player, as you watch their movement and their journeys, you find out where the plateau points are. So, you know, a couple episodes ago, we talked about Felipe Deturi. Well, his plateau was low A, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so he has to meet that challenge this season, start there again, and see if he can evolve. Dylan O'Reilly's plateau was Double A. He did more enough than low A. He proved that he can, you know, hang in high A. It was an aggressive promotion. You could kind of understand it. He was out of place. There's just no getting around it. They needed a leadoff guy, a true leadoff guy. He is a true leadoff guy, but he was overpowered. He just was. And so he's got to get stronger, and he's got to translate that strength to bat speed in the zone. He can't be playing catch up to these pitches, because then you're getting fooled and you're out ahead of things. And so there's a reason why his WRC plus dipped below 100, and it's because of his struggles there. And we're talking, you know, struggles, right? So he might have had a 5-walk game here and there, but by and large, he was not performing well. His strikeout rate went up in Double A because he was facing harder competition. Now, this is a difference here. He's 20. Burneff's still 25. So, right, that gets into the growth path, et cetera. But when you're a smaller player, you know, it just is what it is. You know, this is a guy that was the surprise of the draft that we remember, right? And he was a high school guy, very small, undeveloped. So it's not surprising that he met the plateau here, but I will be concerned if we don't see distinct strengthening this season coming into the season. Like, if I don't notice that he's actually bulked up or at least evolved his speed in the zone, then that's going to be problematic, because then you're looking at a player that might get pigeonholed into a guy that's just, you know, is going to struggle to adapt to these upper levels.
Yeah, agreed. And we got a question on this from Do Wizard, asking or stating first that O'Ray has no power and struggled a lot in Biloxi last season, which we just touched on. Does Arianamo jump him in the depth chart? How would you rank those two? I mean, for me personally, yes, he is ahead of O'Ray on my rankings and everything else. So for me, it would be Arianamo ahead of O'Ray. But I do think I was already lower on O'Ray coming in, just because I don't need power, but I need a semblance of power, and it just was not there at all for O'Ray. And he can change that by putting on some weight, but he's a very slight guy, a short guy. And I don't see, like, normally you see the bat speed before you see the power, and I just don't see it with him. With Arianamo, you actually could see it, because the couple homers he hit 2 years ago were like up at his neck. He was getting some crazy bat to ball where you have to have the bat speed to be able to do that. So yeah, for me, it's Arianamo pretty easily. I'm assuming it's the same for you, as somebody who likes Arianamo in general quite a bit.
Yeah, it is. And also, you know, Arianamo's a better defender, even though Dylan O'Reilly's a good defender. Different players in that. O'Reilly can, you know, he can step in and actually play competent center field.
Oh, yeah.
That's a plus. It's a big difference there. Arianamo really wouldn't, but Arianamo can play any position in the infield and do it like with Gold Glove level. Second base, obviously, he's a better second baseman. Dylan's he's a solid second baseman, but again, Arianamo's like Gold Glove caliber there. More power. just an overall better baseball player, whereas Dylan O'Reilly is still very early in his process as a
Mhm.
professional. So I would just say in terms of where they are in their respective careers, Iraniano's just further along.
Yeah.
Um, will Array catch up? I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. I have my questions. That's for sure.
Yeah. Agreed. Now we're getting into a name that you could argue he probably shouldn't even be in this one after the season he had, but I'm going to because I remain somewhat of a Eric Brown truther. Um, Eric Brown was, first of all, again, like the Bovey pick, I actually was very, very high on Brown coming into that draft. I tweeted it that I wanted the Brewers to draft him, and they did, and I was very, very happy about it. So that is absolutely clouding my judgment on some of this, and I am not afraid to admit that. But I mean, the offense was bad this year. It was brutal. It was a 62 WRC plus in a bad hitting environment. So that means you were really bad in a bad hitting environment. Um, the power just hasn't shown up like I kind of thought it would. For him, I do see the bat speed at times, but I thought I wrote an article about this midseason because he had made some swing changes, and I think he was tinkering a lot this year. And this is really the one
Too
thing that
much.
gives me a little bit of like I'm giving him one more year. This is the main
Yeah.
thing here.
Yeah.
He was changing his stance, his swing, everything a lot. And I actually thought by the end of the year it wasn't in a bad place, but I don't think he had the timing for it down at all. And that's what's hard about making changes in season is that you might get to a point where like the swing feels great. And when you're in BP, no problem. It works great. But you get into a game and pitchers have obviously a different mix. They have different things they're doing to try and keep you off timing. You don't have the repetition behind you to get your timing right all the time. And I thought that was what I saw a lot from him was that he was getting jammed. He just wasn't on time, even though it was a much quicker and more compact like operation. I still thought he was getting his foot down late a lot when I watched him. So that's why I'm giving a bit of a chance. And the other part of it is he's a very good defensive shortstop,
Yeah.
very solid. Like the arm's better than you would think for his stature. I think it's a pretty good arm. I would say it's an above average arm. And he's a very, very good defender over at short. He had a slight little slump at one point when he was really struggling offensively, where I think he let that bleed into the field. I think that was in May, where he had like a 3-game stretch where he made 4 errors or something. But beyond that, he really didn't have anything like that. He makes a lot of plays that are out of the norm. So for me, the major league caliber tool is the glove at shortstop, which is valuable, and the arm and the speed. Although the 20 of 28 on stolen bases is not really where you'd want it to be either. That's not a good enough percentage. But I think he's got the athleticism and everything else. I'm giving him one more year on the bat. If you disagree with this, you can feel free to tell me because he could easily be in others of note. I think the first round pedigree is absolutely helping him here. But what were your thoughts on him watching him this year?
Um, yeah, I think this is another player that gives you another feather in the cap of the AA test, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
as soon as Eric Brown Jr. was healthy in high A, he was performing.
Yeah.
He had decent to plus output, and then he got really seriously injured, and then he had a good AFL season.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the thing that this season, boy, and back to the AFL, he was like playing, neck and neck with Victor Scott. If you know the Cardinals organization at all, he was in the major leagues this year. He made
Yeah.
appearances for them, extremely fast outfielder. And so it was that caliber of prospect, first round pedigree. I don't think it's out of line to put him in this category whatsoever. And it's also fair to say he had just a terrible season at the plate. And
Oh,
and having watched a good portion of the post camera apocalypse days of the Shuckers, he by my observations over the course of the season, I would say in the very least he tinkered and changed his pre-swing setup 3 times.
at
You
least, yeah.
can't do that in you can if you're an extremely good hitter, I guess. it's a challenge to do so. He already had the question when he was drafted coming with the big leg lift. Well, this season, just to paint the picture for folks, mid-season, the longest stretch of using the same batting setup that I saw of him, it was literally like a finely tuned Swiss watch where his bat started vertical above his shoulders. So it wasn't resting here. It was literally his hands were at his head and his bat was straight up in the air. At the same time, he lowered that bat. He was lifting his lead leg into his midsection. So you have and this is all in the pre-swing setup as he's getting ready for the delivery. Those had to come together, and then he had to calibrate the swing into the swing plane through the strike zone and step forward. The results spoke for themselves. It was a total quagmire. By the end of the season, he had gotten injured. That's when Cooper Pratt got called up. When he last was hitting, it was a traditional batting stance. It was to no avail. He did not get hits with it. However, to me, that was where he needed to be to enter the offseason. Work there and build from that. Just make it simple, stupid. I'm not calling Eric stupid. I'm just saying as a general phrase, make it simple, stupid, right? We have to tell that to ourselves. Make it simpler and then have results there. It's like you got to learn the blues before you play jazz kind of thing here. I was so excited to see that for Eric Brown Jr., that he had simplified his swing setup. I didn't even care about the results at that point. I said, okay, good. This is good. We've tinkered around with all that craziness. We had no results there. It was crazy to see it in the season, but it said to me that the organization and Eric Brown Jr. had come to this place of like, let's get this really simple. You're an incredible athlete. You're a very good defender. Let's work here. So my hope is that he's carrying that same setup into the batting cages, into the season, and we see more of results that were akin to high A. I think he can do that. He's an incredible athlete. Incredible athlete. Way underrated defensively. Like there were questions about his range, and his defense is just, it's upper tier. It really is. He makes some uncannily athletic plays. His throw has gotten more accurate. That was an anomalous stretch of errors. So I still think highly of Eric Brown Jr., even though I don't think highly of his season. I see it as a confluence of multiple factors. This is a huge season for him. Because you want to talk about a guy who just fell off the face of the prospect radar. He's not even mentioned in the top 20 anymore. This is a former top 10 guy.
He's not. So
I think he could do it. I think this is a guy that could come in with a chip in his shoulder. He's going to start back in Biloxi. There's no doubt about it. If he doesn't, I'll say I never said that. No, I'm just kidding. So it's a big deal. He's got to come in with a simplified approach. I hope it works. I just hope, he stayed healthy. I know, from the player's vantage point, I know he was healthy. He must have been immensely disappointed. To his credit, he never showed it in the games. He played hard. Just the plate, man. If you're talking about pop-ups, low contact, it was a rough season.
Yeah.
But that final swing setup gave me hope that, okay, we could work with that.
Yeah.
And we'll see.
Yeah, I'm going to try for the people watching on YouTube to share something here, share my screen and see if I can show. I had a comparison just kind of breaking down some of the, we'll see if this works. And this is in July, so I don't think this ended up being the final form, but the lower right is the first time I had seen him with the bat actually starting behind his head. At any point, because he liked to tip it in front of his head, which made it a really long path to get it back to where it needs to get to be on path right away. So this was when I first noticed it, and I just kind of comparing all four of the swings we had kind of seen in his time there.
Yeah, he ended back with something more akin to that bottom corner. What this doesn't cover in here is the swing I was mentioning, which was crazy. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I was talking about it in the forums. I was like, could we talk about this? I was posting pictures. I was like, what's happening with this? Because, I'm telling you, it was like a pendulum. Oh, boy.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, there were a lot of them happening throughout the season. But you can see
already hard enough. You gotta, I play MLB The Show like a religion, and I strike out on sliders all the time. So Eduardo Garcia, I know I say you don't you haven't seen a slider you won't swing it. I'm the same way. It's pot calling the kettle black here. So if you got that amount of moving parts and then you're thinking
Yeah.
heater and somebody's throwing off speed and away, you're just done for. There's nothing you
Yeah.
can do. So I hope that he keeps it simplified.
Agreed. Last one we'll talk about, and we're really not going to talk about this one long because he is not even going to be in the organization next year. But Carlos D. Rodriguez, the outfielder, he did move on to AAA in the later parts of the season, but he did a ton of really good things for Biloxi this year. Very good defender, pretty decent arm on top of it. He was just kind of like the ideal version of kind of what you were hoping Dylan O'Ray might be able to come up with when he made it to AA. Obviously, he's older. For me, we've talked about it before. He did sign with the Braves on a major league deal. It's a non-guaranteed deal, but he does currently have a 40-man spot with the Braves. So very good for him. We won't, again, go into too much here, but the reason I think the Brewers let him go in the end is that he is a Sal Frelick clone, but with even less juice in the bat, that's pretty tough to make work. Now, the Braves might see something where they think they can get a little bit more out of him, but that's kind of how I view him. It's basically Sal Frelick 2.0, but even probably a little bit less power. But again, I don't want to talk too much about him here, but what did you see from him? And do you think he's got much of a shot with the Braves? I mean, that's a tough org to break through with anyway, but obviously it's great for him to have this opportunity, at least to be in big league spring training with a 40-man spot.
Yeah, professional hitter, contact guy, really good swing decisions. I mean, if you want to talk about he doesn't have as much juice, he certainly is not the defender that Sal Frelick is. Not even close.
No.
He'll give you competent defense, but he's not going to make any eye popping plays per se. He doesn't have a great arm. Sal's arm has been undersold since he got called up. I've been saying that for years, and this year I was like, yes, he's showing people. So yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see. He's a guy that he kind of gives you. He gives you that he's a professional, like right through and through. It's in his swing decisions. It's in how he handles himself. So he's a guy that I think he can hang in a major league clubhouse. He's just got that makeup. Almost won Rookie of the Year in the Winter League last year. I think it's a great opportunity. It's going to be one of the more exciting alumni followings this year. I'm going to track them like I track all the guys. I'm definitely going to be tracking Cargo. So I hope it works out. I think it could stick. I mean, last year they were dealing with injuries. Acuna seems to get injured every year now, sadly.
True.
Michael Harris, the second, Michael Harris, I don't know if they call him junior, but man, he's the best player I've ever seen in the Southern League in terms of how he was playing in the Southern League. Yeah. He was so electric for the Braves. My gosh, I missed watching him when he got called up. I was like, well, that's a bummer. He was making plays. Oh, yeah, he was a joy to watch. So, yeah, we'll see. We'll see. He's got an opportunity. What an opportunity it is, too. It's just incredible.
Yeah. All right. Moving to our others of note, we've got 4 names here. Darian Miller is the first one we're going to touch on. Now, statistically, it looks pretty good. He had a 120 WRC plus. He walked at almost a 16% clip. Obviously, again, this kind of points to the Southern League. He had a 682 OPS, which led to a 120 WRC plus, which it was a tough hitting environment. But this is a guy who hits a pretty good amount of line drives. It's not a bad ground ball rate. I think the bat for me is fine. I would love to see more power for somebody. And the reason I'm going to touch on in a second here is I don't think he can catch long term at all. I just don't see it as a catcher. So I don't think the bat really plays anywhere else. Now, if he was a solid defensive catcher, this type of bat would play with that behind him. I think this is the type of bat that would be, as a catcher, a legitimate catcher. I would have a hard time saying like, okay, yeah, I don't know how you don't look at him as a decent, at least option moving forward. But the receiving is pretty rough. We did get a question actually on this from Do Wizard, kind of leading into next year, but it touches on Miller here, and he just goes, thoughts on the catching situation. Wood and Miller, meaning Matt Wood, who we talked about last episode, are subpar receivers. How might this affect the pitching staff? Who do you think ends up in AAA if Cairo goes to MLB? could Miller handle it? So, from my perspective, one, how it affects the pitching staff, I do think they lose them some strikes over the course of the season. I shouldn't even say some. I think both of them lose their pitchers a decent amount of strikes over the course of a season. They drag the ball out of the zone a little bit too often. Miller was better throwing out runners this year, I should note. That was an improvement over what it had been, but it's still not great. And the receiving mixed with not a great arm just makes it really hard for me to view him as a real catcher. Now, he would catch in AAA if needed, and he would do fine. He's not a complete zero behind the plate or anything. I don't want to make it sound like that. But I just don't view him as much of a prospect because I don't think he can stick behind the plate. I guess that's the easiest way for me to phrase it. But I know you and I have talked about Wood and Miller a little bit offline before. And yeah, it's tough. If those two are the catchers next year at AA, that does, I think, put a strain on the pitching staff a little bit, where they're probably not going to have the ability to nibble corners much, because I don't think they're going to get a lot of help from their catchers in that regard. So what are your thoughts on kind of all the questions he laid out here, but especially just Wood and Miller behind the plate?
Yeah, I'm just trying to quick see who the Sounds have rostered today, because they've lost so many guys. They lost Knobs, they lost Mejia.
Yep.
Behind the dish. Gosh, Yersey's gone. I mean, Yersey never really even played. Oh yeah, of course. How about that? Okay, so today, this is funny. This is the first time I'm looking at the Sounds roster in a while. Clancy, shout out. Wes Clark's listed as a catcher. They have David Garcia and Ramon Rodriguez listed.
Yeah,
and I will
they had to do that to protect them from the minor league Rule 5, probably.
Yeah, minor league Rule 5. That makes sense.
Yeah.
But it does, what it tells me, and it's what I also see, both Garcia and Rodriguez are better pure catchers. They just are.
Oh, yeah.
It doesn't matter the level. You watch the games, you see it. They frame. They're quicker up out of their stance. Their pops quicker, better hands. With Miller in particular, I would say, in watching every one of Mizorowski's outings in AA, I would say that Darren Miller cost Mizorowski at least 5 wild pitches, with his inability to read proper, to get out of his stance quick enough, to move laterally, to get his glove high enough for that velocity.
Yeah.
So it just is what it is. And of course, he's never going to get thrown under the bus in a broadcast. But hey, we're not organizationally affiliated. We can speak the truth here without any ramifications. And again, I always want to put the asterisk about I want nothing more for these guys than to find the best version of themselves as player and as people. And I don't say this with any type of disdain or anything. I watch the games. So yeah, Darren Miller struggles with framing. He struggles with movement laterally, getting to pitches that may not be his comfort. He struggles with flipping his glove to the proper position in a pitch, leads to ricochets, to the backstop, things of that nature. That's just not major league caliber. It just isn't. And he's gotten better at throwing out the base runners, but he still does not have a strong arm. Okay. But that's a credit to him that he's worked and he's gotten better. So I personally don't consider either Wood or Miller, or certainly not Wes Clark, as major league catchers. What I see them as is potential break glass in case of emergency.
Yep.
And bullpen catchers when you're talking about that level. And this isn't detriment to any of these players. It's very hard to be a major league caliber catcher. But this is why I loved a guy like Brian Navarreto, because he was so competent behind the dish. And even though he didn't have the offensive output, he was a timely hitter. So I would take that 7 days a week. So it's hard for me in terms of future casting. I just don't consider them serious prospects in that regard. And they could change my mind. I would welcome that. They're still Darian's still only 23. He has enough in the bat. My worry there is he still is he has a swing path that tends to loft balls into the pop-up territory. So he could have more power, but he needs to level that swing out by my eyes. Granted, not a hitting coach, but I watch all these games. And so I tend to see what works in game. I think a lot of his numbers they're elevated by the fact that he gets hit by pitches a lot, leans into
Mhm.
pitches, and he takes walks. So he's patient, but to a fault. I would love if again, this is to your point. Yeah, if he was able to carry this bat and build this bat, and he had like a Brian Navarreto's defense, that's a legitimate prospect, like
Yeah.
really legitimate. But as it is, I have question marks.
Yeah.
I just do, and those remain. And until I see something through a full season, I'm just going to have those question marks.
Yeah. Agreed. It's one of those guys. I was a pretty big fan when he first got into pro ball. He's one of those guys that he reminds me of Peyton Henry when I watch him just because he catches with a lot of emotion. Like he seems like a really good leader on the field as well. The defense just has not come along, which it did for Henry. That's why Henry ended up having
Yeah,
a major league
Henry's a
career.
very competent man. He's, the one thing I will say about Miller is you can see he's a likable teammate.
Oh yeah.
He's got a great attitude, and he certainly seems like a really good guy.
Hmm. Yeah. Xavier Warren, I think, kind of falls into that category
You're
too.
talking about prospects. I'm sorry. I'm just like, wow, that's like saying, yeah, she's nice. Sorry, Darian.
I
I'll work
know.
on that. I'll work on it.
But I mean, I won't touch on it too long here, but like that does matter over the course of a season too. You got to have people who are able to have a good attitude despite anything else going on around them and able to lead over the course of a season. I see that at the D3 college level. I see that in high school when I played and coached. I mean, you see it everywhere. So
Yeah,
it
and
does matter.
I'm just telling you. When I was watching Miz's outings, there were a couple outings where it was literally uncomfortable to watch the caliber of Mizorowski's stuff
Oh yeah.
and
No.
seeing Darian Miller incapable of meeting that challenge. It was
Yeah.
uncomfortable, and I'm telling you, like he had a game in there where he had like 5 wild pitches. I'm telling you, 3 of those, bare minimum, were because his catcher could not handle his stuff.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so that's, when you watch the games, you just have a deeper perspective of things. Like you realize that a lot of times the numbers just don't tell the tale. And it was like, I can remember before Tanner Shears got injured, I would talk about with
Oh
a
yeah.
couple posters, I would tell them, look, Matt Wood cannot catch his splitter. He can't hold on to it.
Yeah.
And so not only that, he's not framing it. So he's not getting any of the benefit of the doubt in the borderline calls. So he has this elevated walk total. He has wild pitch count. But I was telling them, I was like, look, his raw stuff is literally major league bullpen caliber, and they can't catch it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it's a thing.
Oh yeah, it matters for sure. Xavier Warren was also drafted as a catcher, but he very quickly showed that he was not going to be able to handle that. Um, he's shown some good things with the bat in the past, and even this year he ended up being a pretty close to an average hitter in the Southern League. Too many strikeouts, more whiffs than you'd like to see, but he showed some pop. He had 11 homers. The tough part here is just that he hasn't found a real position. The bat hasn't been good enough to kind of lessen the need to find a real position. And it's another situation where if he had stuck as a catcher, you'd be like, okay, like yeah, if he was a decent catcher, it would be fine. But this is one of the 2020 picks. I think that whole season was it was a tough draft to make picks in, and they had to go off of very little because the seasons got cut very short in college. And Warren, he's shown like flashes of what you want to see. Like I said, you've seen some power, but it just hasn't really totally come together for him. And I think right now you'd have to kind of consider him just kind of organizational depth, who does a lot of things that help a team over the course of a season, but not much to really dream on prospect wise. Um, anything you want to add on Xavier Warren?
Yeah, and I think that hits it on the head. Like, he has stretches where he's very good. He just struggles to maintain that.
Yeah.
He fills in a bunch of areas, isn't great in any area per se, just as an adequate defender, but not a good one, really.
Mhm.
Has stretches there where he's just fumbling with himself, especially at first base when he has
Yeah.
to fill in there. So yeah, organizational depth guy. He's a good guy to dream on, right? I can remember this when I think of Xavi Warren. I think of Felix Valerio and how they kind of
Mhm.
were traveling together in the system, and how when Joe Aralt was waxing poetic on Felix Valerio and his ability to rake, Xavi Warren was the guy having hitting conversations
Yeah.
with him. Well, neither guy has really kind of taken
Yeah.
the next step. So, still a fun player to watch because he gets hot.
Oh
But
yeah.
Yeah, just not a guy that you're like thinking game to day he's going to perform. Just is what
Yeah.
it is.
I believe Weimer credited Warren with his breakout at the time as well, that they were having a
Yeah,
conversation when so maybe you know what? Maybe Xavier Warren's
coach,
a hitting coach
coach.
or something down the line.
Yeah,
Like,
or a managing guy. That's
yeah,
what I'm saying. Like he's a baseball guy. He comes up in conversations, but you could just see him potentially
yeah,
going the route of becoming a coach.
yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if that ends up happening with the Brewers. Put it
Oh
out
no.
there. Putting it
Yeah,
out there.
yeah. That'd be cool. Ethan Murray, we touched on a little bit earlier. Very it was a tough season for him. He had a good 2023, like a legitimately really
Really good.
solid season. Um,
Yeah.
he looked like a guy who had all the makings of that utility type of infielder, like a Monasterio, but probably a little bit better if you get the best version of him.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
especially with the glove. I've seen him play some pretty good defense at all
Oh,
three infield spots. So
very
it's
good.
it's pretty impressive that he can actually handle all three well, and that still gives him, I think, some hope, even though this season was rough. The power he had shown the year before just really disappeared. I know he battled some injuries himself, and you mentioned it looked like he probably played through some injuries at times, which was not helping his case. But it ended up being a really rough season. I don't even honestly think we need to dive too deep into this. I think we saw what he's capable of in 2023,
Yeah, yeah.
and hopefully we see more of that in
Yeah,
2025.
we don't.
I don't think there's too
The
much.
question with Ethan becomes he had a really rough inaugural season in high A,
Mhm.
but the defense popped. Got the promotion much like a guy like Gregory Barrios did last year when I was like, huh, really? Then
Yeah.
he came on the scene and had a great season. Brendan Del Churro was talking about him. I had put him out as a candidate if, in my offseason of, hey, this is a guy like Monasterio that could get a call up, could surprise a lot of people, and then he just tanked.
Yeah.
So was he injured? What do we actually have here? He's extremely talented when he's playing well. Extremely
Mhm.
talented. One of the better defenders in the system with a bat that can play. Big
Yeah.
year. Just like Eric Brown Jr., that WRC plus does not lie. It
No.
was that kind of season.
It
So
was it
time will tell.
was a rough season for sure.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, we've got one more hitter here. We have another name that kind of got added mid-season, Adam Hall. Another one of the indie ball signings, few or former second round pick by the Orioles in 2017 out of high school, out of Ontario. So kind of ironically, a little bit of the Dylan O'Ray thing. I was looking up some of the stuff today, and it seemed like Hall was a bit of a surprise pick at that time too. So funny, it feels a little Dylan O'Ray-ish for the Orioles back then, but a guy who stepped in and again, not anything crazy offensively. It was a WRC plus of 106, but that's a 654 OPS in the Southern League. He did not show much pop at all. He had 3 doubles, no other extra base hits, and 212 plate appearances, but he stole 10 bases. He showed an ability to play a few infield spots. Um, at least noteworthy enough in that I think he's a guy that will probably stick around on minor league rosters for a little bit longer, just because he does a lot of different things that help, but probably not much of a real prospect. We should also note he had a 365 BABIP despite pretty low
Yeah.
numbers, so there was some pretty good luck involved. He hit a lot of line drives, which is helpful, but still, I think there was some luck involved. But anything you noticed with Hall just from watching him play a little bit?
Yeah, he's a depth guy. He actually was in the outfield too. Of the three, so just for listeners, in season, Hall was signed out of Winnipeg. Um,
Yeah,
but Hall came on in season. So did Casey. Is it Casey Martin? If I'm recalling off the top of my
yeah,
head
Casey
here,
Martin. Yep.
Casey Martin. I sometimes I call him Caleb. I'm like, I'm not in the NBA talking about the Heat or the Sixers here, people. Um, so yeah, sports junkie. Anyhow, yeah, Adam Hall. I would say Adam Hall was right in smack dab in the middle where, Connor Scott gave the best output and the most impact. Adam Hall still played key innings, no power there, but Casey Martin really struggled, but he's struggling in most places, but he's another guy they can
Hmm.
put all over. Depth guy. We'll see. We'll see if he can maintain it into this season. He is rostered today, as is Martin. So,
Yeah.
um, you know, we'll see. there's just, in an offensively challenged league on a team with offensive challenges, the Shuckers are going to need a lot of bounce back seasons to produce runs
Yeah.
because several of these guys aren't going to be on the team. They're going to be in different places.
Yeah. 100%. So that wraps up the position player side. Once again, we went way longer than I was expecting to, but you know what? I think we gave some pretty decent information on some of these guys. I'm sure some of the listeners don't know anything about some of the smaller names as well. So good to touch on them, but we'll move to the pitching side of things now. And again, we'll move a little quicker through these. The thing with pitching is also that you get less of them, you don't see them as much, so you don't have as steadfast opinions on them. And at the same time, we don't get as much data on the lower levels before AAA that give us enough of an idea of how everything plays and everything else. So we just go off of what we see. But moving right into it, we're going to start again, like last time. It's just going to be starters and then kind of the piggyback role and then the relievers. We won't really tier them, although we kind of did within the each level. But starting with Jacob Mizorowski, I mean, obviously, for most people, he's the number one pitching prospect. In terms of stuff, I don't think there's any argument that he has the best stuff overall in the organization, or at least in the minor leagues. Just with we're talking triple digit fastballs at times. We're talking two good breaking balls. I think the curveball surpassed the slider, and it didn't really get talked about like that. But I think the curveball is the best breaking ball he has now. Changeup still not really there, but huge extension. He throws the ball from about a 5-foot release height as a very tall person himself. That's not normal. And he's doing that with huge extension that would be close to 100th percentile in MLB. It's just going to be a matter of command. We've known that forever with him. It's really the only thing. Like the potential is one of the best pitchers in baseball, a guy who could probably compete for a Cy Young. There's also a chance he's a reliever.
Yeah.
That's how wide the difference in ceiling and floor is. I think the nice thing is that I think the floor is pretty close to being a good reliever. Like as long as he's healthy.
Yeah.
I think you can live with some of the command issues out of the pen when you don't have to worry about it over the course of time adding up as much. And he gets to just air out his stuff in shorter stints. And we saw that in like the Futures game a couple years ago where he was touching 102. If he's in there for a shorter stint and knows it can really play up. But I thought we saw some strides from him this year. It wasn't perfect. I still don't know that I'm super bought into him being a starter long term, but I also don't want to rule it out, which going into the season, there was a chance I was going to see enough to be like, okay, he's a reliever. I'm not there yet. I think he showed enough of he had some 10 strikeout games. He had a stretch where he
Back to
really
back.
limited his walks. Yeah, back to back 10 strikeout games. And at the same time, he was limiting walks for a pretty good stretch. And then they came
Yeah.
back with a vengeance at times. And that
Yeah.
was just kind of how it worked. But you see the glimpses of a guy who could stick in the rotation. What did you see from him? And do you think I think they're at least going to start him again in AAA next year as a starter. I don't know that it'll stick. I think he probably makes it to the big leagues as a reliever before he starts a game. But that it might end up trying to follow like the Burns and Peralta and Woodruff path where they mostly relieved their first time up and then moved back into the rotation. That might be the hope. But what do you see for him next year?
Yeah, I was going to lead with that I saw a very Burnsian path here. What I saw was a guy who just struggled as a starter, like in terms of consistency.
Oh yeah.
Had electric outings, and then the problem is you just didn't know outing to outing if he was going to completely lose it. He did better for a spell, and then he'd have a 3-inning outing where he had 5 walks, a couple wild pitches, et cetera, and just couldn't find the zone. And so I'm sure Keith Law was giving his money Burns, yes. But when he went up to AAA into the bullpen, he was lights out. And so there was a path there. And so what that did for me is I said, well, I guess it doesn't matter if you keep trying him as a starter because you know that at any given point in time you could bring him back to the bullpen role and he could just nail it down for you. So to me, that's an insurance plan.
Yeah.
And I think that's where he's going to ultimately have to start at the major league level. Like I wouldn't feel confident
No.
expecting him to come in and start major league innings, but I certainly would feel confident that he could come in and strike out major league hitters from the late inning
Mhm.
bullpen role. No doubt about it. When he is in those abbreviated outings, he can let it rip. His stuff is so electric. Um, but yeah, that the open-ended question just remains: can he, consistently control his starters' arsenal for outings after outings? Like, if you can't do that, then you're a bullpen guy.
Yeah.
And I said it from the moment he was drafted. There is nothing wrong with a guy with his stuff ultimately just ending up being a high leverage shutdown
No.
guy.
No.
I have zero problems with that. So
No.
if he ends
Yeah,
up
if you
being a
get
Cy Young candidate pitcher, sweet. But the alternative is great too. So I'm
yeah.
okay with it. And even having, he's a fun pitcher to watch. I do come outing to outing a little nervous. Like,
Oh,
is
yeah.
he gonna
Yeah.
be able to find the zone? But his work, and he did not really. I think he may have had one outing in AAA where he struggled a little bit with the control. He didn't really have
Yeah.
any problems. That was a huge boon at the end of the season.
Yeah. No, he showed some good stuff. I think the concern will always be, do big league hitters just swing out of the zone less, because he gets a ton of out of zone swings.
Yeah,
Will big league hitters be a little more either just patient, or will they be able to just lay off of it a little bit more often? And that's where the walk rate could really skyrocket, where it's already pretty high. But again, I don't know if it matters out of the pen. I think the stuff is that good that he'll just strike enough people out and get
yeah,
enough soft contact where he can work around that. Devin Williams has walked a ton of people his whole career. He just struck everyone out around it and
yeah.
gave up very little
Gosh,
hard contact.
yeah.
So
Talk about a high leverage guy who just loves putting guys on base.
yeah, yeah,
I mean, how
100%.
many? I got to be honest there. I mean, I'm gonna be okay with not having random 1 out or 0 out bases loaded scenarios for the closer.
Yes.
Oh, stressful
Yeah,
environment to watch a game.
we saw a lot of that over the course of time with him, but yeah, we'll move to
And I
Wichrowski here,
can't
Brett
imagine it's
Wichrowski.
gonna get better in the Big Apple. No offense, but that's an even
Yeah,
harder
well,
environment
at the
to
very
handle.
least, they're not going to handle it well there if he's doing
Not
it.
when he
So
blows it.
that one that could be tough on him.
Good
But
luck, Devin. Wish you the best.
yeah, Brett Wichrowski, I think, was probably the biggest surprise for everybody this year, just in how everything kind of went down. 13th round pick out of Bryant University last season in 2023, signed for 100,000. You can get 150,000 without even going into the bonus pool. So he signed for less than that in day 3. Um, and then he came into spring training and was reportedly touched 101, was kind of sitting in the upper 90s. This is a guy who sat 90 to 93 at Bryant, and slider. I mean, it's more of a sweeper, really, but he mixes the shapes of the fastballs. He mixes the shapes of the breaking balls. I think the changeup came along as the season went. It wasn't a great pitch, but I know it's a newer one for him that he's still working on.
Hey, that's Wes Clark behind the dish.
It sure is. Yeah, if you're watching on video, you can you can see Clark back there. But yeah, he just has the type of stuff that made it surprising when he went to Double A for me, that he just didn't get as much swing and miss as I thought he was going to get. And I knew he'd probably get hit a little bit more at that level. Again, this is a guy who was at Bryant. He was a swing man at Bryant not even 2 years ago right now. So like a guy who was not in their everyday rotation at a school that's not exactly a powerhouse for baseball. So expectations in the quick movement for him probably put a little bit too much on him, but I was a little surprised at the lack of whiff. I think we saw some pretty good things as the season progressed at times, but it just was finding consistency for him as well. The walks weren't terrible, but they were probably a little higher than you'd want if you're not getting as many strikeouts. But I do think there's something here still. Honestly, I really think there's something here still. I think he's a legitimate pitching prospect for the Brewers. And it'll be really interesting to me to see what happens next year in a repeat, when he's probably a little more, in my estimation, he'd probably be more prepared for Double A at that point. I think they did the right thing pushing him, because he was too good for high A immediately. But this is the jump, and for pitchers and hitters. And I think he just wasn't quite up to the challenge yet, but I like him quite a bit. What do you think from watching Wichrowski, and kind of what did you see as the season progressed?
Well, the thing that really pops out for me is his elite blown save percentile in 21 games. Oh wait, um, just kidding. He was actually he pitched his best baseball by the time he got injured, which really stunk
Yeah.
because this again gets into the seasonal arc. They didn't have Wachowski for the postseason, and that really sucked. Just like the Mudcats didn't have Jason Woodward, that also really sucked. Like these are two guys that were coming into their own. They looked electric. His best starts were at the end of the year. Like he kind of hit this hiccupy
Mhm.
patch in the midsummer, and then he really found a groove. And you were starting to see him sit 95 ish, getting a little more movement, getting more accurate. That was one of his biggest issues for a stretch. He was struggling finding the zone. You know, the walk rate per 9.4, it's getting up there, and it spoke to that. But man, I was super bummed in season when he got injured because
Yeah.
I really wanted to see him in the postseason environment. You really want to see these guys challenged in that capacity, especially with Montgomery, which had a very pesky lineup. So I think to your point that you mentioned, like, yeah, I think this is a great thing to come in. He's got the experience under his belt. And I think also it's a lesson in terms of how we view spring training numbers. I think it's very easy for guys to come in super fresh, super amped up to be in major league camp. He didn't carry over 98, 99 into the season at
No.
all. So just for fans moving forward, that's a sign of what they're capable of. It's certainly not a testament of what they're going to do.
Yeah.
But
And
to
that
to
was
my to my earliest point, he was pitching his best by the end of the season. That's very encouraging. He has stuff, absolutely has stuff. He's kind of a 5-pitch guy with the shape of his
Mhm.
fastball, and he's young, inexperienced in the starter role. So I think this is one of the guys when you start talking about the Brewers prospect verse, this is one of the guys Baseball America always brings up.
Yes.
So he has a rep in the greater baseball world. So this is a guy that should be on your radar, that you should be following in the early part of the season. If he does well, he's going to be a AAA, and he's going to be knocking on the door.
Mhm. Yeah. And it should be noted, even though the velo didn't quite hold in longer outings as a starter and stuff, it did jump the average velo from his
It was
Baseball
up.
America put out a list of the biggest velo jumps, and he had the second biggest one in all
Yes,
of minor league
yes.
baseball. So
It was up like
while it
3 miles
didn't,
per hour on average, wasn't it?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So it still jumped
Didn't
from
he
low
average
90s to
at like
mid 90s.
94 or something?
Yeah,
If I remember. Yeah.
yeah. It was 94.7, I believe, is what
Yeah,
it
and it was
jumped to on average.
91. Yeah, it was crazy. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So
it's
yeah.
that is very real.
Oh yeah. It's just not 99, 100.
But you wonder, or at least I do, and I'm sure you do, what I wonder about is, okay, well, if he had that jump and we know he can hit 98, was he just building up
Yeah. It's
repetition and strength and then he could sit 96, 98? If that's where he ends up, that is a big deal.
right. I mean,
That's
and
a big deal as a starter with his
it,
stuff.
it does. And you look back, that's kind of the path Burns and Woodruff took in their velo
Exactly.
development.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
went from low 90s to mid 90s to suddenly in like 2019, 2020, 2021, those guys were sitting in the 96 to 98 range pretty consistently, and that's kind of the path they took. So it is possible. It'll be very interesting to see this year. One guy who does not have that type of velo but has a very very good fastball shape is Logan Henderson. Henderson is one of my kind of personal favorites just for a while. Watching him last season, I loved it. Um, it's a fastball changeup, and that's really it at the moment. Now he throws a cutter, he throws a slider, but he doesn't throw either of them very much.
Yeah.
Um, and they both aren't great pitches at the moment. He moved through really every level of the minors almost this year. He was hurt. He got hurt in the spring breakout game. He missed the first month and a half or so, and then he started throwing in the Arizona League. Then he made a couple starts with Wisconsin. Then he went to Biloxi. He didn't last very long there either because he pitched extremely well. He had a 10 strikeout game very early on in his Biloxi tenure as well. But this is a guy who the fastball has a fantastic shape, even though it's only a 92, 93 type of offering. And then the changeup is a really good pitch too. And I would love to see something that does go the other way. a slider or a cutter at least become serviceable. I think that's going to be hard to start without that. But at the same time, there's a lot of Devin Williams type of, I don't want to say he's Devin Williams, but that's what Devin Williams was at his peak, was a fastball that had really good ride and then a really nice changeup that played off of it. And he would throw a cutter once every 70 pitches. That's kind of what you can see as, I don't want to say a floor because his changeup's not the same as Devin Williams. It is not that level, but it's a plus changeup. It's a good pitch. So I think there's a decent chance that even if starting doesn't work out, he can be a pretty nice weapon out of the pen, which is nice to fall back on. But what are your thoughts on Henderson, and what did you see from him, especially in Biloxi this year?
Yeah, when Biloxi was dominant, this is, if we're going to talk about players plateauing again, that I keep bringing up, he plateaued at AAA. There's no doubt about it. His 2-pitch mix was getting hammered from time to time, especially against the better bats, like against Norfolk. He was getting pounded. So it's a thing there. And so I love Logan Henderson, the competitor. He's got fire. He's into it. I've loved him since low A. It felt like, from my vantage point, ever since he came in the system, it just felt like we needed to see him at the higher levels because he has the stuff that's just going to blow away the lower level hitters.
Yes.
To your point about, I would like to see something go the other way. Absolutely. Because everything's going to run arm side, even the drop. So, man, that would be a real rich man's offering if you could bring a cutter or a slider. Woo! Then you're talking. Okay. When I see Logan pitch, I see bullpen. I don't see starter, and I'm okay. Again, like, I don't care about the roles, yada yada. I just want him to be impactful. I think out of the bullpen, he could be a freaking solid 7th inning guy to a closer role if he embraced it. In that capacity, I think he could sit 93, 95, which would be huge. Like, he really kind of sits 91 and tops at 93 when he's starting, maybe touches 94. So he's going to start in AAA. I don't think he starts up with the Brew Crew, even though he's rostered. He's got the options. He's gotta master the International League. That's what I want to see him. They're probably going to start him. They've always started him. I want to see if he's worked on anything in the offseason in terms of adding to the arsenal, because that could be a game changer. It could be an absolute game changer. As it is, those AAA hitters knew what was coming in terms of they only had to sit on one pitch. And they were okay striking on, a changeup, but sitting on the heater. And he was giving up home runs, balls to the wall. So it's going to be interesting to see how he starts the season. But I mean, uber talented guy, has certainly never missed leg day in the gym. Really built, just like you, man. When he first came onto the scene in low A, I just loved his fire. He's not as fiery now as he's kind of a chiseled minor league vet, but I know he's got that competitive fire.
Oh, yeah.
So he's just a guy I'd like to watch.
Yeah. Agreed. Next one on the list for the starting group here is Casey Hunt. Again, this is one we've talked about now at 3 levels, so we don't need to go into depth on really the stuff or anything there. We've talked about that a lot, but I think we should just point out that the guy just kept performing. And he got to AA, and now he's full-time starter at this point, obviously. And I think the main thing we should probably talk about here is that playoff start, because we mentioned early on that the that the Shuckers only they lost 2 games to 1, but they lost game 1, and Casey Hunt, and this was, I believe, only his 7th overall start with the Shuckers. It doesn't count towards the stats because
7 in the 3rd innings, baby.
Yeah.
And the run that was counted was inherited to Blake Holub, right? Like, he didn't give it up.
Yeah. No, he left the mound with a shutout in the 8th inning, just with 1 runner on, who ended up coming around to score. But
on the road,
yeah. And again, in his 7th start, I believe, overall with AA. Yeah. So guy just went out there and shoved against a very talented team. I think for him, he's another one I really need to see in AAA, and I just need to see how it plays against the very best hitters. But man, he did not get challenged by anybody at any point this year. I mean, he just kept moving, and the whiff rates were crazy. The strikeouts were crazy. And then to move from the pen to the rotation and just keep going
Yeah.
was so impressive. I mean, he was just unbelievable. Rightfully was one of the pitchers of the year for the Brewers this year. Just an incredible season from him. But yeah, anything to add on Hunt's just quick time really in Biloxi?
Fantastic mullet. Love the
Yeah, oh,
hair. Means a lot to a guy like me who wears most of his hair in his face. Just a total stud. He's one of my favorite overall players in the system. Undrafted free agent, you love it. And the thing that's great about watching Casey Hunt pitch is he still brings that late inning bullpen confidence to the mound as a starter. Like he's got the shirt buttoned down, he's got the gold chain, he's like letting
yeah.
you know he's gonna dominate you. I love that. It's like having a cornerback on the mound, right? Like he's a stud. I personally have. I'm just gonna make the prediction. He's AAA is not. He's gonna dominate there too. His stuff's that good. Like he's got his breaking arsenal is nutty good. Everybody misses those pitches, and he's faced some very good
Oh, yeah.
hitters that didn't have a chance. I think he's going to hit the International League. I don't think he's going to. I think it's going to be a quick promotion if he doesn't start there right off the season, which I would be unsurprised by. I think he's going to be in the top 1 to 2 arms in that pitching staff.
Yeah, no, I agree. He just, it's funny. I saw a video of him on Twitter last offseason, and I immediately started putting him in my prospect rankings because I was like, this dude's interesting. Totally forgot about it because it was 3 months. And then you gave me the heads up. Like, this guy is just shoving in his first couple outings in low A. And I remember I was on the bus to an away game for my coaching job, and I was watching the video on there, and I immediately replied, I'm like, yeah, that's legit. Like that's really, really good stuff. And it just immediately pops off the page.
Yeah. It's so wild when you watch as
Casey
many
Hunt,
players.
I agree.
When you watch as many players as we do, when somebody has a separating factor, it just sticks out like a sore thumb.
Mm-hmm.
It's like finding a 4-leaf clover too, because baseball is so hard to succeed at on a day-to-day basis. When you see a guy just mowing people down, whoo, it's pretty awesome. Pretty awesome.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, it was immediate and it was obvious, but he was just fantastic all season. Next guy here that we have is Tate Keener, another one who kind of burst on the scene as a 7th round pick in the 2023 class. Obviously, not a shock to anybody that the 2023 class was again helping somebody find their way. Everybody performs, it seems, from this class. Ironically, the one disappointment is probably the 1st round pick from this year. So, but Keener, I mean, he got to Double-A. He showed some pretty good things in his time there as well. It wasn't anything. There had been strikeouts. He had shown the ability to generate whiff, and he continued to do that. It wasn't dominant. It wasn't the same type of jump that Casey Hunt made, but he performed. And I believe he had one pretty rough start. It might have been his first, where the Shuckers actually gave him a ton of run support. So they actually kept him out there for a little bit longer than he probably should have been because they needed the innings and they knew they had a bunch of leeway. But for the most part, he performed pretty well after the jump too. What did you see from Keener?
Yeah, he faded a little bit by the end of the season. It could have been fatigue. I don't know. He was getting hit a bunch. He got pounded in the postseason, unfortunately. And that mattered. He was the game 1 opener. I think he gave up a 5 spot, if I recall correctly. He did get into the 3rd inning or the 4th inning, excuse me, I believe, before he was shut down. I think he pitched 3 2/3 off the top of my head, which was better than Nate Peterson, who we'll get into his one plus inning performance. But those losing the Henderson and the Mizorowski, and Wichrowski was injured. That's kind of the nature of that, because if you look at that last month before the Shuckers faded and backed into the playoffs, they were actually in the season series with Montgomery. I think it was neck and neck. And I think Montgomery had won 2 more games, but they just didn't have the horses. And Keener faded. I think he got tired, but he was, and the reason why I say that, he was sloppier around the zone, wasn't as accurate. But his bread and butter is his slider and his ride on his heater. He'll work that. He's savvy, knows how to pitch. Will work you up in the zone to get a chase, and then he'll hit you the slider away, backdoor you, front door you. He's very savvy. And his first outings in high A were not good. He was sloppy, but you could see the stuff. And I
Mhm.
was saying that to people, said, don't worry about this. He has it. And sure enough, as often is the case when you watch the games, when a guy separates himself, they step up and they start finding their groove. He did that. But he certainly didn't disappoint in Double A, and I think that was
No.
a key experience. He's going to be a core starter to start the year.
Yeah, 100%. And we have a question on that from Do Wizard. The rotation, he says, looks amazing. But who do you think will be the standout? Can Casey Hunt go to AAA? We kind of talked about that already. Can Witrowski improve? We kind of already talked about that. But who do you think? Let's say we know Henderson and Mizorowski are gone. We know Hunt. I think there's a pretty decent chance they'll push him to AAA pretty quickly. But for me, I think the guy who has the best chance to be a standout on next year's rotation, and probably to stick there for at least a little while is Witrowski. I think he's got the chance to. They're probably going to want to see him there a little bit longer, see the success kind of mount for him a little bit at that level. So I guess I would go with Witrowski as the potential standout. Do you have anyone else that you would want to throw out there?
Well, I think they'll probably. I think Witrowski will end up being their proverbial number one to start the season. I think Hunt is going to be aggressively promoted to AAA, pitcher of the year. Has shown that every level he can dominate without question. I personally think they probably end up doing a little bit of a complete 360 back to the beginning of last season. They start Weisner as a
Mm-hmm.
starter. That led to his early promotion to AAA. I think they give that another try. I think we need to remember that I think you're going to have a Coleman Crow healthy, and so he's
Yep.
going to be in that rotation, as is Brandon Kanar, if you remember. I
Yeah.
think he'll hopefully be healthy again.
Hopefully.
So for me, the question becomes, is it Nate Peterson going to remain a starter? Are they going to promote somebody I'm not thinking of off the top of my head? That's kind of where I end up there. But top end, Witrowski, if they move Weisner, he was very impactful at the beginning of the year as a
Yeah.
starter. His season kind of fell apart on him, unfortunately. And with him, it all comes, can he hold velo? That's his issue. Is he
Yeah.
tends to fade into the low 90s, and then he can't hit the zone, and he's walking guys. So struggled mightily when he got promoted to AAA. He had a good start, and then just faded and was walking guys, getting hit, getting pounded.
Yeah.
So this is a big year for Weisner.
Yeah.
Who has shown flashes, has
Yeah.
absolutely shown
Oh,
flashes,
100%.
but he's just never held it together for long stretches. So
No. Once we got some StatCast data on him, it's 6 pitches, but none of them are really standout. They're all just kind of
yeah,
decent. So I think the hope here is that you can make a Colin Ray type of player out of him. Like
yeah,
that's
yeah,
that's probably your high end. Maybe your middle end is like a Bryce Wilson light type of guy where you're able to get outs, but it's nothing crazy special. But I do agree. I think they'll probably have him starting in Double A again next year. And he
yeah.
was in our piggyback one, so I think we'll touch on Nate Peterson here, who was also in that round. You kind of mentioned him, but another guy who it's not a ton of velo. I think it's not bad off speed offerings. I think they're okay. He had a pretty good whiff rate. It was over 30%. The strikeouts are fine, but they're nothing to write home about. They're okay. A few more walks than you'd want. The FIP does not love him because he did give up. He had some pretty big homer issues. He almost gave up
Yeah,
2
gives
per
up a
9.
lot of long balls.
Yeah, which the fastball shape, even as at the time of the draft, was reported to be pretty flat, and there's not much to it, and that is checked out in me watching him. I just don't see much with the fastball. I think the off-speed pitches are fine, but again, it's just a matter of, can you have a fastball that works with it? Um, if not, I don't know how far he can move, but I would bet that he will be back in Biloxi. He was okay this year. It's not. I think he's still worthy of getting some attention. But he's going to have to clean up the homers. I think he's going to have to find either more velo in the tank, or he's going to have to fix the fastball shape and maybe find a better two seam, maybe a sinker, something along those lines to try and help him out. But anything from your perspective that you want to mention with Peterson?
Yeah, and getting into the nuance of player by player, Peterson definitely pops in moments. Like, he's got the ability to get chase. He can play the game of ride and run. Like, he's capable of doing that. Arm side run, he can get you chasing out of the zone. And when he's locating, and this is a big if and when with Peterson, his main issue is he hangs pitches. They're
Yeah.
just, you can't get around that. When you've got stuff of his caliber, it has to be pinpoint. It just does. When he's pinpoint, he gets swings and misses, and that's what you get that 30 plus whiff rate. However, that home run is like, I can't tell you the number of hanging breaking balls I saw that were just dead center when you were like, whoa, what are we doing? And so he was stretched in the fact that they had to push him into a starter role that I don't think he's equipped to handle in terms of a day-to-day thing. He filled the bill, but I'd rather him be an inning guy out of the bullpen, just from my perspective.
Yeah.
If he can add, like to your point, if he can add a couple ticks and he can fine tune his zonal accuracy, that's a valuable arm. I would say he can touch 95 when he really leans back, if I recall. Sits 93, but he's got to locate better. He just has to. Otherwise, you can't be giving up, what was his per nine on the whole? Yeah, almost
2, 1.85.
That's just like, what? What are we doing?
Yeah.
I remember in season, I was complaining about it in season, having watched another outing where I was like, God, he gave up 3 homers. He was top 15 in all of minor league baseball in terms of home runs allowed. Yeah. And this was like when his inning count was at like 60.
Right.
So it wasn't a pretty picture.
No.
So
definitely something. Yeah, he's definitely gonna have to work on that. We'll see what we get from him next year. Again, I don't think he's one to cross off any lists or anything. I think he's worthy of giving another look here. But yeah, we got some things to clean up with Nate Peterson. Moving to the reliever side of things, this is probably the most the starting spot was pretty good too, but this was a really good group. And Craig Yoho obviously is. I mean, we got to talk Craig Yoho every time because, again, he did keep moving through every step of the system pretty much. But we won't go through too much. He's got an airbender. It's classified as a lefty curveball by Statcast sometimes because it's so disgusting. And he's got a great breaking ball that goes the other way and a fastball with 20 inches of run on it. Even though it's only in the low 90s, it gets a ton of ground balls and a ton of soft contact. His cutter's not great. I'm not even sure they're going to keep doing the thing with the cutter, to be honest. I would not be shocked if he's just a 3-pitch guy next year when they come back. But this dude just dominated, and Biloxi was no different. He did it immediately upon arrival. He was not giving up anything. Unfortunately, AA cameras are not great for seeing the amount of movement he gets on stuff. So if you're watching the video right now, it's not the easiest one to watch, but the stuff is just gross, and I don't think there's too much more to say with him. Do we think I personally don't think there's any chance he's in the big league bullpen out of spring, but I think there's a pretty good chance he's in the big league bullpen by like May. What are your thoughts on kind of his timeline looking into next season?
Yeah, I don't. He's not rostered today, is he?
No, he's not on the 40 man.
Yeah, right. So they don't need to start him there. That's my thing. Like, why would you? Honestly, even though we want him there, like I want him there. Are you kidding me? I was saying when he was down in Wisconsin, this guy needs to be in the Brewers bullpen. I was saying that back in April, for crying out loud. Like, when you see it, you just know. Let Ginger cook. That's what I'll say here.
Yes.
She rocks. Incredible talent. Just that's it. Boom. Incredible talent. Is a major league pitcher today. Will probably take a little time to get there, and that's just for optioning reasons and control reasons and things of that nature. And the fact that the Brewers have a very good bullpen, if you don't know.
Yeah, even more than him, it's for the ability to not lose pitchers that they like. That's more what it is, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing, like, going all the way back to Urseg in our 2+ hour Shucker pod. Woo woo. We lose good pitchers because we have so many good pitchers.
Yes.
It's the nature
Yeah.
of it. It's the nature, and you go from your strengths to try to address your weaknesses, and it doesn't always work out. Baseball's hard.
Yeah. Honestly, for me, the next guy we're talking about here is maybe the one of the most underrated relievers and also one of the most underrated seasons. Sam Gardner
This
was
is our guy right here, Sam Gardner. We are firmly sitting the front two seats of Sam Gardner
yes.
truth movement. There's no doubt about it.
I mean, this is legit stuff. Really good breaking ball. He doesn't walk many guys. He gets a ton of swing and miss. He struck out a ton of guys this year. His ERA was great. His FIP was even better. He doesn't, I mean, he got a ton of pop-ups. You can see here his infield fly ball rate was 98th percentile, which means
Crazy.
you're getting on hands, you're getting a ton of bad contact, and then
Yep.
you're getting a ton of whiffs on top of it. I mean, he's 27. So obviously, and he'll be 28 in a few days here, actually, it looks like. But it's the type of story that the Brewers have been able to find and put at the end of their bullpen, and suddenly he's just getting outs and nobody understands where he came from or what happened. But this is that type of guy. Like Sam Gardner gets outs, and he doesn't do it just in like there are guys we could have talked about, we have talked about who they get outs, but it's like, yeah, but will that translate? I think his stuff translates. I really do. I think he's a guy who can get big league outs and would not shock me to see him next year at some point. He's still got multiple years of team control due to when he was signed, so they don't even have to put him on the 40 man until 2026, but he's up there in age, obviously, but the stuff is just legit. And I'm a big Gardner guy. I know you are too. Like you said, I think we've probably been leading the way on that one, but what do you see from him and what do you think his future is?
Yeah, I mean, I've waxed poetic on a number of indie signings in the last 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
Gardner might be my favorite, and that's a I mean, I've been on the front lines of a lot of indie guys. Sam Gardner, just like, it's so funny because I can remember when he first came on the scene with Wisconsin, you could see he was nervous, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I was wondering, I was like, wow, what does he have? He's not able to access it fully because he's nervous. He's like, this is his opportunity. From that moment he got comfortable, he just got better and better, was electric in Australia, like unworldly numbers down there, winning relief pitcher of the year. And then he did not miss a beat in Biloxi. Was one of their best relievers in the strength of their
No.
team, which was the relief corps for the majority of the season. And the relief numbers get altered by the end of the year because of promotions and injury, but I don't carry any weight with that. Gardner was one of their best arms, bar none. I think he starts in Nashville. I hope he starts in Nashville. I think his stuff plays there. His breaking stuff is filthy. He gets
Oh yeah.
so many chases because they think he's coming on heat, but he'll throw. He's one of those guys, like when I'm playing MLB The Show, they'll have their like repeats, in the broadcast booth, and they'll say, "Here's a guy who'll throw three of the same pitches." Sam Gardner will throw you three straight breaking balls, and you will whiff on every one, even when you know it's coming. He's got
Yep.
stuff. I love him. I love him. There's another guy who I'm invested in seeing become a Brewer. I really hope it happens.
Agreed. Yeah. I think another guy we both have been pretty high on, and another
Merkel.
one who was a little bit of a under the radar pickup, an NAIA undrafted free agent, 6'7", 255, Nick Merkel. Nickname is Large Mammal. But he just, he got the job done at AA, and then he went to the AFL, and you got to see the stuff. And you could see it on video, but again, it's AA video. You don't always have the best angle of like how stuff moves, especially fastballs. You can see the big movement stuff, but it's a little harder sometimes to see. Like, I remember putting in my notes, I was like, I'm pretty sure he's throwing a cutter, a sinker, and a four seam, but I can't 100% tell. And then he went to the AFL, and he absolutely is. He was throwing 6 pitches. He's got a mix of, it's all low 90s fastballs. It's nothing crazy velocity wise, but it's huge extension. And he's got 3 fastballs that legitimately play. Like, these are all playable MLB pitches. The breaking balls are as well, and the changeup's pretty solid too. They're all pretty average or a little better, but I wouldn't say any of them are below average, which means when I look at this guy, I see a guy like Joakim Soria.
Mhm.
Not prime Soria, but like the Soria the Brewers had, where it was relievers don't throw that many pitches and they don't have that many that are actually playable. And that's what Merkel does when he comes in. He just mixes a ton of stuff. He throws, he gets a ton of grounders, and then he also gets whiffs. And that's a great combo. And from a weird, tall, lanky delivery, he's listed at 255. I would not have guessed that, to be honest, because he's actually pretty skinny on the mound. Like,
Yeah.
I know it's obviously 6'7, so there's going to be weight there, but he doesn't look like a huge dude. He moves really well for his size, and that's why he gets so much extension. I like Merkel. He's the type of guy who I think Gardner's got a higher ceiling as a reliever, probably, but I think Merkel's got an MLB caliber. Just his whole mix of everything is a guy who could pitch in the big leagues.
Yeah, I agree with you here. I think Merkel's he's just a fascinating story. If you've ever heard any interviews with him, he's a guy who's dealt with a lot of personal adversity in terms of discovering who he is as a person, and he's now at a better place. I think he struggled with some depression, perhaps. But he's a guy who just like kept at it, went the JUCO route, NAIA, earned an opportunity, found that faith in himself, and Brewers picked him up, and man, he has been a solid bullpen guy. Just a guy who'll consistently, reliably give you 2 to 3 innings when you need it. He shifted into a starter role, and they were dealing with the injuries and the lack of depth in the starting staff. Didn't do as well there. First experiences as a Brewer, frankly, being a starter. Went to the AFL. His numbers wouldn't tell you what his stuff is down there. But you never know what people are, what guys are working on down there. I mean, shout out to our little lefty. We know Manfredi struggled down there mightily. You just don't know what they're working on. But I've been waxing poetic on Merkel since he was a T-Rat. Like, I love his stuff. He's consistent, huge hook curve, just huge drop, 12-6 drop, hammer drop on that. And he's just an easy pitcher to like. I just know from a manager's perspective, you love having these guys in your bullpen. Absolutely.
100%.
Starter struggling. I know Nick will give me 3 innings no matter what and carry to the next guy. Just a great guy to have. Yeah,
absolutely. Another one here, Justin Yeager. He was acquired as part of the William Contreras trade for Esteury Ruiz, along with Piamps as well. Some injuries, a lot of injuries, really, last season in 2023. You see good stuff with Yeager. Like there's velo. There's a pretty solid, tight slider.
Yep.
But it feels like, despite the walk numbers not being in a bad spot, it feels to me when I watch him that the command in zone is just, he leaves stuff in a hittable place a lot. And the numbers were solid this year. They aren't bad at all. He struck out a solid number. He had good whiff rates. Again, the walk rate wasn't great, but it's not bad. He didn't give up that many homers, but it did feel like, and we don't have hard hit data, but it felt like he gave up a decent amount of hard contact every time I was watching. But at the same time, it's everything looks pretty good from a numbers perspective. And there are 2 pretty good pitches here with the fastball and the slider. What do you see with Yeager? Do you think he's a guy who I would imagine he's in Nashville next year, given his age and everything else going on? Do you think he's a guy that could help the Brewers at some point down the line?
Maybe. Yeah. I mean, what your scouting report on his tools there are spot on. Like tight, very tight slider. Really stepped into the closer role and really shut it down for the most part. But yeah, to your point, what's funny, and also it should be noted, he's in the Winter League right now, and he's also closing games down there. And he's doing really well. He's doing really well there too. And same sentiments. I know someone, I think is Lewis Eli, pardon me if I mispronounce it, brought up in a forum in the Rule 5 forum at one point in time, why aren't Russ Smith and Yeager being talked about as Rule 5 protections? Well, I thought, well, we don't know, but I mean, I didn't think the Brewers would ever in a million years protect him. They didn't, but that's not to say that they couldn't. But I think part of it is what you're speaking to. Is like you watch him, he's effective, gets the saves, but there's always something where you're like, huh, you know what I mean? Yeah. And there's his evolution as a pitcher, I think, has to become that fine-tuned laser precision with his stuff.
Yeah.
If he can control his stuff a little bit better and tweak it a little bit to get the fine-tuned accuracy around the zone, that is a guy who can pitch in a major league bullpen because
Yeah.
those pitches are good. It's
Yeah.
just
Oh yeah.
need a little more. And I think that AAA, to your point, will be the test.
Yeah.
How does it play in the International League? There's very good hitters in the International League. So it'll be interesting. It's not quite the PCL environment, but
Yeah.
it'll be
Yeah.
interesting.
Yes, it definitely will. Another name that we saw in the AFL, and I think another name we both like a decent amount here is
Yeah.
Will Childers.
Yeah.
Another undrafted free agent. The
Look at that.
Brewers are always finding these types of arms somewhere. This is a guy who was a pretty big recruit when he went to Georgia. His dad was drafted by the Brewers back in the day, but he had a lot of injuries in college, and just he was coming off Tommy John at the time. It was actually similar to like Shane Smith's type of story where it was a guy who had
What? I'm sorry.
but yeah, like he's just the ERA is 4.15. The FIP is 3.3. To me, the FIP is more indicative of what I saw when I watched him. But at the same time, he had some struggles.
Yeah.
He got sent back to high A, and when he returned to double A, he looked good. Like that was a
Yep.
different dude when he came back. The velo had taken a tick up. The curveball's good. It's another guy we saw even bigger velo in the AFL than what we had seen in double A. We saw some 98s and some 99s almost.
Yeah.
It was like 96 or something.
Fascinating.
But there's velo there. The fastball shape is pretty decent. And the curveball is pretty good. Like I keep bringing up Shane Smith, but there are some similarities in like the way their stuff works. So there's some similarities in like the stuff itself. Smith has more control of it. Smith can hold it for longer periods of time, but I like Childers. I think he's another guy who, with a little bit more development, another guy who has 2 more years of control before you even have to worry about 40 man. And he's only 24. He's not like the same, upper 20s age wise. Like he's at a pretty reasonable spot for him to be for his age in terms of development. Another guy that I view as a very real potential major league reliever down the road at some point. What do you see with Childers?
Love him. This is another instance of, in terms of like when you consider the greater universe of minor league baseball, there are story arcs that matter. And so how guys perform in the postseason, that matters. So, we talked about it last episode, a guy like Will Rudy stepping up and having his best start of the year in the final game, winner take all, that matters. Will Childers started in high A, was promoted, struggled, got sent back down, was dynamite, got re-promoted, and was dynamite. That story arc matters. And then he got to the AFL and he showed his best stuff of the year. So clearly we have an ascending player. Very exciting. So
yeah,
this is, when you're looking as a junkie like I am, you're looking for storylines to go into the 2025 season that aren't the top 5 prospects. Oh goodness.
right.
We see whatever. I see enough. I don't care. Honestly, I watch the games. I want to see guys like Will Childers. Frankly, I want to see a guy who's is unheralded, not on the top 30, but is showing these signs of a meaningful player that can stick in the professionals. That's not easy to do.
No.
And so we talk about market inefficiencies that the Brewers, they dominate. Well, undrafted free agency, independent leagues, things of that nature, unheralded like a Casey Hunt, all that stuff matters. The pitchers and the players, they know it. And so then you're throwing noodles on the wall. You get all these guys, you're trying to find a guy like a Will Childers who's starting to create a storyline and a story arc. So to the fans that are listening or watching, this is a guy we need to watch. Let's see what he does in 2025.
Yeah, 100% agree. Caleb Bowman, this is one, his stats were really solid this year, 3.07 ERA. FIP was under 4 as well. Strikeouts are in a fine spot. He does not walk many. For me, this is one of the few guys that we've talked about here where I like Caleb Bowman, but I just don't see much of a path to a major league arm. Somebody who just does a really good job in the upper levels and helps those teams have success, but I just don't know I don't think the stuff is here for Bowman to be a big league arm. Like it's almost like a poor man's James Meeker, who didn't really have the stuff to be a real big leaguer either. So I like Bowman. I think he does a lot for the teams that he's on. He's of this group, the one of all of them, honestly, that we're going to talk about, that I see the least likely of actually being able to impact the big league club. But what were your thoughts on him? What did you see from Caleb Bowman this year?
I love that. Only here will you hear a poor man's James Meeker. Um, yeah, I think I generally agree with that. I think I will say what was interesting about this year is that I felt like I was seeing a little more ride and run on the heater, and that means something. So he had a little more two-seamer action going on it, little tailing. He can get it moving away. To your overarching theme here, I think I agree with you there because I think a lot of what he relies on is his delivery. Like he's got a
Yes.
very deceptive delivery. It's quick, it's herky jerky, but he also is prone to getting hit. Like he'll
Mhm.
have, and I question whether that's going to play at the upper levels.
Yeah.
So if I see it work in Nashville
Yeah.
and I see him start missing more bats, I mean he was close to 30%. Let's be real here.
Yeah.
I think we maybe need to give him a little more leeway. But I think I generally agree with you. Like he definitely falls into that. Like I never really quite understood the Meeker call up, and now he's since been released.
Yeah.
Um,
I think they just wanted to give him
an
a chance,
opportunity,
an
a very
opportunity, a
Brewers
cool
thing to do.
story for
Yeah,
a
he's
guy
a
who was
very
an
hard
indie
hitting
ball
round
guy.
out for his only
Yeah.
out. I think I see a little more innate, nascent movement in Bowman's heater, whereas James was kind of
Yes,
just.
I'd agree.
But yeah, I don't know. What's funny about it is that he kind of like I get the same vibe with him. Not quite, doesn't have quite Jaeger's stuff and capacity, but something always happens when I watch
Yeah.
Bowman and Jaeger where I'm like, did that really feel good? So we'll see.
Yeah. Next on the list, we have Russell Smith. We kind of hinted at him earlier as somebody who had struggled a little bit after having a kid early in his professional career. This guy, he's 6'9", 235. I have a really hard time believing he's lost. Don't get me wrong. This guy has lost it. He's in good shape compared to where he was a couple years ago. But I have a hard time believing Merkel at 2 inches shorter weighs less than Russ Smith. Still, that one 20 pounds less than him. I would have a hard time buying that one. But I thought this year the big thing for Smith is I just think he's moving better again. We saw the velo jump out of the bullpen, not an insane amount, but we saw it more into the mid 90s at times than where we were seeing it when he was starting, where it was more low 90s. His best pitch is still, for me, the changeup. That was always his best pitch when he came out of the draft. But the slider made big strides
Big,
this year.
big
It
strides.
like
Yeah.
really, really big strides. Again, this is 6'9". I have a feeling he doesn't have a ton of extension despite that frame. He doesn't get very far down the mound. It's kind of a short stride. So I don't know that he's getting the most out of his body. That is something the Brewers have been able to help pitchers with at his size. The Brewers have done well with this type of build with Brian Hudson and Jared Koenig. Like those are big lefties. Um, the numbers, so the ERA looks great. Not as many strikeouts as you'd want, more walks than you'd want,
Yep.
almost no ground balls, like a first percentile ground ball rate. That all scares me. But when I watch him, I do think the stuff can play. I don't know that he's found it and figured it all out yet.
Yep.
And he doesn't have a ton of time left. He was Rule 5 eligible this year. He is getting up there in age, and his organizational clock in general is ticking. But I do think there's still something here to pay attention to, especially with just the build and the fact that we did see some of the velo up a little bit, and still, I think the biggest thing is that improved breaking ball, because before it was kind of like Ethan Small, where it was like, okay, there's not a ton of velo. It's a really good changeup. We need something to do to go the other way, and I think he found that. So, what did you see from Smith, and what do you see for him moving forward?
Yeah. When he first came in, he was an early draft pick.
Yeah.
But when he first came in, he looked out of shape and he really struggled with the ride on his heater. It would get away from him. It would run up and out of the zone
Mhm.
consistently. So he was walking a lot of guys then, and he still walks too many guys, but I agree with you in terms of like it feels like he's just figuring it out, and much like Brian Fitzpatrick, for the T Rats, came in the best shape of his life as a brewer.
Yeah.
He is now a dad for over a year, so I think that maybe he found a little more comfort there, got a little more focused. And so those are things I'm looking for coming into this season. Does he still have that slider? Was a good pitch this year,
Hmm.
and that to your point, like he was dominant for stretches, and then he kind of he kind of tapered off a little bit, but he tapered off because he was so dominant for that stretch earlier in the year. Um, if he can keep that shape of that slider into 2025 and he comes in the same shape, he's a guy that I have in this kind of in my spreadsheets that I keep for all the guys. I have this funny page that I have called "What If," which is like where Russ Smith goes for me. What if he actually keeps this going, keeps adding a little bit on the fastball? That's a guy who could potentially be a starter again.
Yeah.
What if he adds extension? So these are all questions I have. I still am left wanting more
Hmm.
at the end of the day. And so
Agreed.
I'm not a firm believer, but I am definitely paying attention.
Yep. 100% agree. And our last name here is Blake Holub, acquired from Detroit for Mark Canha last offseason. Man, when he was in AA, things went
Woo.
really well. I mean, the numbers on the screen, if you're watching, are including his AAA numbers. If you see just the AA numbers, it is pretty eye opening. I mean, he dominated at AA. When he
Did
got to
not at
AAA,
AAA.
he did not at AAA. When he got there, and the whiff rate was actually still quite good in AAA. His stuff is good. Like it's a riding cutter, which is just
Yeah,
it's an abnormal shape. There's basically nobody with the same shape as he has on that fastball, which I'm guessing is one of the main things the Brewers saw in this deal and
yeah,
wanted to take a shot on him. It's a pretty good breaking ball. His I saw some numbers from AAA, which I'm assuming is part of it here. He does not throw the ball in the zone. And at AA, these guys just kept chasing. I mean, they were chasing it all
yep,
over the place. And when he got to AAA, they were not chasing, and he was walking everybody. And then he had to come over the plate, and then he'd get hit hard. He's got the stuff to like. I'm telling you, that cutter is a alien pitch that like nobody throws a pitch. It's got like 19 inches of induced vertical break, along with
yeah.
legitimate cut. Nobody has that pitch. But I don't know that he has any idea how to throw that pitch either at the moment.
That's
And
fair.
I think it's about honing it in and just kind of figuring that out. But you saw it at AA that and AAA, he can really get swing and miss. For a reliever, I think if there's one thing to have in your back pocket over anything else, it's an ability to get swing and miss. Because if you can figure it out at all at any other level, you will be able to pitch out of the pen in one inning stints and it'll be fine. You can't do it as a starter. You have to have more than that as a starter. But in the pen, that's a good starting point. And
Yeah,
I really think the stuff can play. He actually has I think he has a good splitter. He barely throws it.
I know.
The Brewers seem to be anti-splitter, which is
I
kind of annoying.
know. What's going on with that? I think I've joked with you before that they can't hit a splitter, so they don't want their pitchers to throw it.
It might be because like Montas stopped throwing it. Um,
Oh,
I
drives me nuts. Splitter's such a filthy pitch. I
I
wish
know,
they would
like
throw
Tanner
it.
Shears, I can't wait to see his splitter
Oh,
back in
no,
action when
that's
he
my one.
um, yeah, I mean, I hope they let him at some point throw the splitter again because I think that's a good pitch too, and it gives a
It's a
different
really
look.
good pitch. I can
Yeah,
remember every splitter he threw last year, and I was like, "Ooh!"
yeah,
But I
yeah.
think
Oh
I
yeah.
want to say he only threw like single digits.
Oh, in
Um,
AAA, that's all it was. Yeah, for the
yeah,
ones we have tracked, it was single digits, but yeah,
I can remember it. Like I was like, "Did he just throw a splitter?" And then I didn't see it again for like a month. I was like, "What?"
yeah. No, I'm really hoping they let him do that a little bit, but I think the stuff is there. So he's still very interesting to me. The walks are going to have to be a lot better than they were in AAA. The command is going to have to be better, but I think he's got the stuff to be a legit pen option at some point for the Brewers if he can kind of figure out some of the rest of the stuff. So, any extra thoughts on Hola before we got
Yeah,
one
yeah.
more
To the
question
point
to go?
about the zonal accuracy, just as quirky as that pitch is, and like again, if you have a unicorn pitch like this, and that's like we're bringing up Tanner Shears here
Mhm.
because Tanner Shear's splitter is one of the best pitches in the entire system when he's
Yeah.
healthy. It's a filthy pitch. Nobody can hit it, nobody can catch
Nobody
it,
can
and the
no.
umps certainly can't call it. It's that
No.
good. Blake Holub is similar in that with the cutter, and his zonal accuracy. He also has this crazy volatile, hyperactive delivery as well, where he's like falling off the mound, and so this is a guy where, man, if he can just tone it down a notch, fine tune it, you're looking at an eighth, ninth inning guy.
Yeah.
Not a bad return for a rental of Mark Hanna.
No.
That's just like who did not have the season he did with the Brewers last year. And so
No.
this is a good lotto ticket. And
Yeah.
man, he was good in Biloxi, like good.
Yes.
So
Yeah, he was.
You just hope that it can translate. So hopefully you can get a little more accurate. And there's too many guys. The overarching theme here as you're going through is too many guys with a lot of talent, but throwing way too many walks.
Yeah.
And that just is not going to play if you're trying to get up to the major league level. The manager's not going to put up with it.
No. And that's honestly, like, if you look at the Rays organization, that's usually how it looks too. I think a lot of the best pitching development systems have that, where these guys have the stuff, because you have to have the stuff. I mean,
yeah, exactly.
Man, is awesome.
You rather start with a big ball of clay,
yes,
and cut away, as opposed to trying to build up a David sculpture with nothing. So.
Right. Yeah. Like, command is great, but it's a lot harder to start with the command and no stuff than it is to start with the stuff and no command. So I think the Brewers take these chances on a lot of guys, and then they hit on some of them. And I guarantee you, we will see some of them even beyond Yoho. I'm not even going to count him. I guarantee you we'll see at least one of those other guys in the Brewers bullpen at some point in the future. It would shock me if we didn't see at least one of them. So we do have one more question that we'll get to here from Dew Wizard. It's about Blake Burke. So it's kind of Biloxi related, because he's asking, how do you think Burke will do if and when he gets to Biloxi? This one's tough for me to answer, just because we did not get much of a look at him in high A. And I think he was playing hurt in the few games that he did play in high A, but I liked him pre-draft. He was one of the guys I ranked him. I did a internal ranking of like 150 some prospects last year, and he was in the 30s. So like, he was drafted around where I saw him. I think the bat is legit. I think he's a better first baseman than people might think, just because it's more in the rowdy realm, where I think he has really good hands. I don't think he's going to get to a ton of stuff that, you might have seen from like a Carlos Santana or something, but I think he's got as much or better range than Rhys Hoskins and much better hands. So if he hits, he can play first and it'll be fine. So I guess for me, I think he'll perform. In general, Biloxi seems to be a pretty tough place to hit, and the whole Southern League. So the numbers might not look as exciting as you want them to, but I think we'll see the power. I think we'll see solid numbers, assuming he's healthy and assuming he's in decent shape, because I think that is the other thing we'll have to watch. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, we didn't. I mean, we got to see like barely anything of Burke last year. He looked out of shape to me. Like, he just didn't look in late season game shape. I know he also looked like, to your comment there, he did look injured. Just wasn't moving comfortably. I don't know. So to that end, I don't know. His projection, I hope it translates, because we need that kind of bat in the system. I would be completely unsurprised if they started him in Biloxi, honestly.
Yeah.
Though high A is more than likely the Bovey route with a quick first month kind of promotion. But yeah, we'll just have to see. We don't have any information there, literally none. No. So we'll just have to see. I personally, the thing I'm looking for coming into the season, no matter where he starts, is I want to see him in shape.
Yep.
That's what I want to see. I want to see a guy who's moving freely, moving comfortably, and swinging, comfortably. And if he's doing those things, the rest will take care of itself.
Yeah. Agreed. Well, we somehow made the Shuckers episode the longest of the one.
I'm shocked. I'm shocked.
I feel like we overcompensated, but you know what? It's fine.
I think we did that. We needed to work it out.
Yeah, we had a lot of thoughts we had to get out on the Shuckers, and
I feel healed.
Thank you all for listening to all of that. We've got one more of these coming up. We've got the Sounds one that we will be releasing sometime in the next couple of weeks before I get into my my coaching schedule where I am just not going to have time for 3-hour episodes of podcast talk.
Happy New Year's, everyone. We're recording this before New Year's. Happy New Year's, and I hope we have a great 2025 with the Brewers.
Yes, absolutely. Happy New Year's. You may be, I don't know when this is coming out. This might come out after New Year's, and either way, we're wishing it to you. So, thank you all for listening. If you are actually still listening at the 2:45 mark or wherever we are, but we will see you next time with our Nashville episode.